What are you trying to say? Anybody can miss a shot. Nobody misses when I'm at the end of the rope. You never had a rope around your neck. Well, I'm going to tell you something. When that rope starts to pull tight, you can feel the devil bite your ass.
Yeah, you're right. It's getting tougher. The way I figure, there's really not too much future with a sawed-off front like you.
What do you mean?
Because I don't think you'll ever be worth more than $3,000.
What do you mean?
I mean, our partnership is untied. Oh, no.
Wait.
Not you. You remain tied. I'll keep the money and you can have the rope.
You filthy double-crossing bastard! Of all the stinking dirty tricks.
Way back to town is only 70 miles.
Do you expect me to talk?
Hello and welcome to episode 231 of Do You Expect Us to Talk? I'm Becca and this time locked in a deadly Mexican standoff with my co-hosts Chris Byrne and Dave Bond. How are you guys?
Right, so does that mean we're all going to shoot at each other or we're all going to shoot all over No, that can't. Hold that thought. Good evening, folks.
I'm just wondering, out of us, who's the good, the bad and the ugly?
Well, I won't go into that because also joining us for this series is
the rogue fourth member.
The rogue fourth member, Charlie Brigden. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess I can apply those to all of you, maybe. I don't know what I'd be as the fourth one. You
are the handsome. We'll have a new one. But
you're Lee Van Cleef in the last film.
Yeah, here he's a villain, and now he's very much a good
guy. To be honest,
I
wouldn't argue about being any of them. It's not like the good is fantastic and incredibly good looking, and the ugly is literally like fucking disgusting or anything.
Yeah, because it's a bit harsh to say that Eli Wallach is ugly, and no, he's quite handsome really. But I just want to also say it to you guys and to all our listeners, thank you so much for waiting. Because we've not recorded since January. Obviously, life gets in the way, and then I was on holiday. But we're getting back in the saddle and getting ready to ride back into town. As we continue on our journey, doing all the westerns.
I liked your puns there, Becca.
We're recording on the 25th. I'll try and get this if Chris can get the notes done. I'll try and get this out by. I won't edit it for a couple of days, but I'll try and get it out within the calendar month of February, just for the sake of not making people miss a complete month.
No, we've got a week left, so no. But I can hold my hand up and say, I apologise for that, just because I went away for a couple of days, but I've had this week off. So,
that is some epic attempting to shift blame onto yourself. We haven't recorded in 8 weeks, and because I've been away for a couple of days. How does that suddenly become?
Sorry
your
about
fault?
that, everybody, but I've taken some time off.
Yeah,
well,
2 days.
I was sick pretty much from Christmas to early February. Yeah. So
we've all had the lurgy going around, haven't we? I've had cold and one thing another and bronchitis, and we've all just been full of lurg. There's a lot of lure going around, so it's not very nice at the moment. So if one thing or another, life gets in the way. New jobs at Lurgy, holiday time. Trying to get obviously new tax year is incoming. You've got to use up holiday, and I think I would have rather have been off next week. But they said, no, you can't do it. Too many people off. You've got to take this week instead. And I was like, thanks. So that's what I was doing. And Charlie's been off with Lurg, and it's all just been chaotic, but hello, we are back now. We'll try to be back in your earballs with some sense of, some semblance of normality, and try to hit a regular stride.
I think we're past promising every week, but we do try to promise regular. So the next one will be soon, probably.
I got back listening to Hitchpod, which is a fantastic Australian podcast dedicated to the Hitchcock movies. I think they're on the season 2 or 3 now, and they're like, well, we record every month or so. They're quite obviously. Both hosts, Kat and Dan, they have their own podcast mainly around cricket, big cricket fans, But they're like, oh yeah, we do this podcast every month or so. It's quite loose, and they try to do lots on the side. So maybe we can take a leaf out of
It's just the fact we had 3 long gaps for various reasons. I think somewhere around when I got married, I think you were sick just after, and then we had a gap into last year, and then we've just had one. And to cut a long story short, since we started as a podcast, we've averaged it's probably about 30 episodes a year now, but it used to be 40 odd. And I think in a calendar year to a couple of months ago, we've done something like 13 episodes. So yeah, we will try and build up from that, because that isn't quite good enough. But there'll always be gaps. There'll always be gaps.
Hand on heart, apologise.
I think the problem is that I used to, and again, I think it's a function of age and experience. I used to get frustrated because now playing was such an influence, and they've never missed like a scheduled date. They schedule
they churned it out, didn't they?
And I used to just go, well, if they can do it and we're doing less than them, why can't we? And I just find the more frustrated you get about it, the more you piss each other off about it, and we wouldn't still be here. And the wise thing to think about it is it's a hobby. No one's paying anything to us for it. We do it as a hobby. If we're available to do it, we'll do it. If we're not, we won't. But we do honestly recognise that we had a gap just before Christmas and we've had a gap just after, and neither of those are what we want to do routinely. But if we're sick, we're not going to give each other a hard time over it.
No, if we're poorly, and obviously we can't speak on whatever, then we don't, we're not going to force ourselves, because nobody wants to hear that.
And if Chris is out knocking women up, that's his business.
Yeah, Chris is a little girl, so,
Chris is a little girl. Oh, Chris
I was going to say.
Life finds a way.
Going to say, like, you have to insult me, Becca.
I didn't. Sorry, that's not how I meant it.
Chris is a little girl. Chris is a little girl. No.
Yeah. So that's why we've been busy. And so I think we'll agree, none of it my fault.
No, Dave, you're scot-free. You're the innocent one. It's okay.
Although on any given week, there have been times we have been about to record and I've cried off. So on a given week, it's been me. I've been a week or so of the delays here and there. So yeah, we're back today. And for anyone who's completely forgotten, because our last 2 have been what we laughingly call the sort of non-canon releases, the non-numbered releases. If we do one for charity, we do one for Patreon, which we stopped pushing really, or we do one for Christmas, we don't number it. The Bond commentaries we don't number. So the numbered ones are where we go chronologically through a director or a series of films. And so the last numbered one we did was some time ago now. I'm just going to have a look back to see when it was published.
It was before Christmas.
Well, yeah, because we did 2. We did one in January, which we recorded just before. Then we did the Christmas commentary. Yeah, December the 12th we published for a few dollars more. So yeah, that's that's 2.5 months ago now. So what are we covering tonight, Becca?
Tonight we are reaching the end of the Dollars trilogy, Man with No Name trilogy. Anyway, the epic Sergio Leone Dollars trilogy. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which I'm very excited about because I had never seen it until now. So yes, tonight we are reviewing The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, starring Clint Eastwood, Steve Van Cleef, Eli Wallach, and that's all you need to know. Original score by Ennio Morricone, story by a load of names that I'm about to make up, so I do apologise.
Just a bunch of Europeans, or just.
This is it. John Vincenzo.
It's Enrico Palazzo.
Directed by Sergio Leone Dollars and released in 1966.
Chris Waddle.
I can only apologise. I am one of these people who does mangle foreign names. It's quite amusing. I used to work in financial services, and we deal with, I think, Swedish, German, Icelandic. That was a mouthful. And also some brokers and IFAs from various African countries. And I did, even with my German A-level, I didn't have to mangle some of those names, so I can only apologise. I don't mean any offence or anything like that. I do try my best.
As someone who has a slightly odd spelling of a surname, I do get it. Even I get it mispronounced all the time. So it just happens. Sorry.
I think your surname is quite easy to pronounce, so it's obviously Bern.
It is, but then some people don't always understand what's this Y shit mean.
Oh, that's true.
So
then Luciano Vincenzoni is quite a long name, but then I've got a long name. If we ever do any Japanese classics, I'm sure I'll mangle them. I can only apologise. I don't mean any offence by it. I'm trying my best.
Oh no,
I'm just a spac, so excuse me.
I won't worry about it. I think a lot of people sort of don't. They underestimate the logic of how the spelling of how Irish do things. You look at like any Irish names, you're like, Jesus Christ, how the hell do I pronounce this?
Well, that's true, yeah, definitely, especially if you're using like the old Gaelic language as well. So
yeah.
But no, yes, that was me mangling the Italian cast and crew of this film.
So have you've mangled who's in it so far then?
Yes, I've mangled pretty much everybody, apart from Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, Eli Wallach.
I mean, with all due respect though, like they're the only three that really matter.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the only people that anyone's gonna know. Like
that's a point to be made. I mean, not just the name recognition to this generation or these generations. There's a few different generations on the earth at the moment, but of the generations that have been around since this film, I'm not commenting on the quality of the actors, but I'm not even talking about name recognition. I'm talking about characters. I'm talking about the fact that there was a recognizable lead villain in both of the first two Dollars films, and I would say it's less so the case here. It's more shades of grey between, and it is part of that whole circle of, I mean, we're coming to it in the superhero genre at the moment now that we're almost reaching the parody stage, and it sort of comes after that deconstruction phase, and we're right in that at the moment. We've had the Lantern Jaw Westerns heroes, and now we've got basically the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is almost a parody name in itself. I don't know if it's
coming out the other end now, aren't we?
None of those people are exclusively any of one of those three things.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so, especially like the Van Cleef character. You'll see this is because this film is kind of like a prequel almost. Correct me if I'm wrong. And obviously plays a different character, but he's always going to be like the archetypal screen villain.
But it's all about their relationships to each other. Whereas
Precisely.
Before it was all about their relationship to two different characters from the same guy. So they're full on deconstructing the Western here, much as he will in his next entry and the one we do in a few weeks' time.
I think that's the film's genius, though, isn't it? I think that's probably why. I mean, out of all the Dollars trilogy, I mean, they're all classics. They're all highly revered. This one, to me, certainly is my first impressions. Stands out to the one that is kind of on the pedestal the most. And is always lauded as as the classic. And if you want to get into spaghetti westerns, this is where you start. Certainly with this trilogy, definitely. And the fact that it does deconstruct in that way, and why it casts such a long shadow, not just in the western genre, but drama, and obviously we just read to the likes of Tarantino, is to see why it lasted through the decades as an absolute stone cold classic.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing with Tarantino, and I don't want to go into a big chat about Tarantino, but I think it's clear from this series we did on him 3 or 4 years ago now, that I'm very much a fan with, I wouldn't even say reservations, but I certainly had some negative things to say about him. But overall, I think most of his films are extremely good, and I think he's very good. But in much the same way as he'll talk about potential future projects that you can take with a pinch of salt because they'll never happen. How many years was he talking about the Vega brothers? It'll obviously never happen now because we're both too old, but then it was Kill Bill 3, and then it was I might do this and I might do that and I might do the other, and at one point it was even Star Trek. That would have been a sequel to A Piece of the Action, which might have been interesting in its way. But the other thing he does is every time he talks about his favourite films, he names a different one. Now, I think that's a function of three things: memory, who he's talking to, and the fact that he knows so many films. I remember Martin Scorsese was once asked for his 10 favourite films, and he got to a list of 127 and had to stop. And he just said, "But there's so many movies." And so many great movies, and I think there's a little bit of that with Tarantino, but certainly at times he has named The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and it's been on home releases on the front cover as my favourite movie, Quentin Tarantino. So definitely he has named it at times.
All the kind of various, like Kill Bill, all the kind of Western infused films that he's made, we can certainly see.
But his characters are the same. They're never good or all bad. If you pick possibly his worst character in terms of being absolutely psychotic, you would possibly throw, not necessarily, but you could make an argument for Mr. Blonde.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
he's the most loyal of all of them. Honor amongst thieves. Did years in prison and didn't rat out the two that had put him there.
No, exactly.
And it's the same here. And I did read earlier that which one of them is the bad and the ugly was swapped around in the theatrical trailer anyway. So I think it's
that's it, exactly. They can all apply to each other. They're all elements of each and every one.
It's much more of a move than anything else. Absolutely.
Definitely. And that's the genius of the film for sure.
So, well, you're the easy one here, Becca. Your first experience of this was today.
Literally just today. Oh, no, obviously we planned to record it a while ago. So I did start to watch it, and I just kind of like got like the main beats and everything. I mean, like the credit sequence is surely one of the most famous in history. It's like three minutes long, just incredible. And like the opening 10 minutes is also quite iconic because there's no dialogue. But it's amazing to learn about how much like was improvised in this film as well, because I didn't have any knowledge of it. But yeah, it's one of those. I'm going to hold my hand up and say I'm that person in the team. A lot of these films I have not seen. I don't quite know what's happened. I've just fallen off my list.
To be fair, Becca, I was just shocked to read James Mason as not appearing in this film. The reason being, we were talking about North by Northwest before we started recording. So we were talking about so I've got the North by Northwest page open, and I was sat there looking at James Mason's name, thinking, where the fuck was he in this film?
He's not in the film.
And I was thinking, Philip Van Damme. Where do I know that name? Oh, yeah.
Neither is Cary Grant. Neither is
yeah, but my eyes were in line with his name, even though Cary Grant's right above it. Yeah.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
That'd be quite interesting. Like actors appearing in other films. That's probably another chat for another day.
Sorry, first viewing today.
But yeah, first viewing was largely today, all the way through, all 3 hours of it. And it is an epic. Really, really enjoyed it. I'll definitely have to go back and watch it again to soak up all the little bits and pick up all the crumbs that I missed the first time round. Performance is spot on. Clint Eastwood, I think, has never been cooler. Maybe he's Dirty Harry, but he's just an icon. He's definitely iconic movie villain, especially here as well. Appreciate his role changes certainly in this trilogy. But again, he's kind of like another one of those characters whereby he'll be the same, but he may have a different name. Probably Clint Eastwood is, assumes a blondie character here today. But no, I really enjoyed it, and I can definitely see how and why it's remained so popular and endured throughout all the decades, and it remains iconic today. And I think it will shoot very highly quickly up to a list of favourite films ever. But yeah, how about you guys?
He was known as George Kaplan. I shut the page, Dave. Jesus. Yeah.
Actually, one thing I did. Yeah, I went to go see North by Northwest at the BFI, part of the 4K restoration for that anniversary screening. One thing that will stick with me is just how, obviously, Cary Grant, who's quite known for having like a really nice sort of like Hollywood tan, I just kind of felt like I wanted to give him like a coat of varnish or something. He just looked so, oh my gosh, like he was carved out of rich mahogany or something. I was like, oh my gosh. I don't know if that was just like the full page colour restoration.
I feel the same any time I see I so used to see Bob Monkhouse. It could be real tan, but it might not be. And you just think
fantastic.
You just imagine when they take their shirt off, the collar will be like filthy and stuff like that.
Just like pretty spray tan.
Yeah.
But no, he looked very good. But I was just like, wow, he'd been quite a long time in that California sun. But no, he looked very sharp in that suit. And the crop duster scene, never looked better.
I don't want to step on fun facts, but we may have mentioned in an earlier show. So he wore the same poncho in all three films, having not washed it or changed it.
Oh, right.
No, sorry, Cary Grant. Yeah, no, Clint in this film I meant. But yeah, Cary Grant did not wear a duster in North by Northwest. It would have looked out of place at the United Nations.
I think we did mention it, and it was a previous fun fact that I think he's worn the same, Cary Grant. Clint Eastwood's he's worn the same outfit, basically. He's worn the same poncho in all three films, and he didn't wash it in between, and so it must have stank.
There's something so timeless, but on North by Northwest, the late 50s, early 60s, that American era with those suits, and they've always got a drink in their hand and things like that. It's kind of timeless.
He's either smoking a cigar or got a glass or something in his hand. But
the Mad Men evokes the same feeling. Yeah.
Precisely. Well, I'm looking forward to. Obviously, we're big Hitchcock fans here as well. This is just a slight diversion, but we'll get back onto the westerns in a minute. Yeah. But I just had to say I'm really looking forward to discussing Hitch. I know it's not, it's quite passé these days and not very trendy at all.
Touch it.
But I'm a big fan.
Unlike the deeply fashionable Dollars trilogy.
Yeah, this is it. Precisely. Well, we've got new westerns, neo-westerns. We kind of come out the other side. Going to sort of like, new westerns being made now, quite popular. So yeah, I think it's as fresh as any genre really. But yeah, that was my first experience of this film, and indeed this trilogy. Certainly tonight, and I'm glad to have got that ticked off my list. But it's certainly one that I'll revisit because it's just one that is so wide-ranging and so classic, and the bit of stand.
It sounds like someone's got the Salazzo scene going on in the background. The Godfather when Michael's about to shoot Salazzo in the throat.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry about
the train is
that.
screeching.
It's probably my house because we've got it's a really old 30-year-old house.
All right.
And our water pipes are a bit dodgy, so I do apologise.
I'll
mute the microphone.
All right, sorry, go on.
No, that's it. I'm done. I'll pass you over to, I don't know. Let's put Charlie on the spot. What was your first experience of this film? How did you get on with it? Over to you.
Yeah, I've seen it lots of times. I think I can't remember the first time I saw it. I think I was looking up earlier. It was on the Movie Jones season that I used to watch back in 1988, so I could have picked it up there. But yeah, I mean, it's a masterpiece. It's like Dave said, it's a really interesting kind of change from the first two films, where it's much kind of morally grey, and even Clint Eastwood, the good, is a wanker. Really, they're all bastards, and they're all kind of double cheating each other out and trying to get the money and whatever for themselves, and they're happy to do some pretty nasty things to get it. But yeah, and also the way he uses the American Civil War as the backdrop as well is really interesting. And I remember on one of the posters, the tagline was, for these three, the Civil War wasn't a war, it was practice, was something along those lines. So that stuff is really interesting. And yeah, that kind of is where some more of the humanity of some of the characters is kind of exposed. Presuming we all watched the same version, the nearly 3 hour.
That's right, yeah, 2:58 something.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a director's cut or an international Italian cut or whatever, but that adds some more things as well. Some just interesting little moments.
Broadly speaking, and we'll see this with Once Upon a Time in the West, the newer versions were the intended versions. They tended to be hacked for international markets. And you see that with other spaghetti western directors. I won't go into it now, but both myself and Charlie have covered various home releases where they'll send you the theatrical version butchered in the same way as the sort of Wicker Man is butchered, in that it's perfectly watchable cut, but for whatever reason they've decided to trim 15 minutes out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how essential the deleted scenes were, but they're good character bits. So, and it doesn't really matter. What's like 20 minutes between friends in a film like this? Obviously, Morricone's score is amazing, especially the ending cues with the Ecstasy of Gold and the trio at the cemetery.
Didn't that feel so grand?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I don't know if Tarantino used part of. I think he might have used part of Ecstasy of Gold in one of his films as well.
Morricone did him a song. Did him a score for The Hateful Eight, didn't he?
He did, yeah. I'm just thinking maybe in something like Django or Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah, and of course there's also Bounty Law in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So you don't know.
I still haven't seen that.
I love it, but it's a film that certainly on first viewing forget the plot. Not because there isn't one, but he's just become less and less interested in forward momentum as he's got older, and you either go with that or you don't. It's a bit like James Cameron is nowhere near as tight as filmmaker as he was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And you can either go with it or not. And so even if you look at something like Django Unchained, King Schultz goes into like the saloon with him, and you get close-ups and very slow shots of him pouring a beer, and it's like completely unnecessary, but it's just he's letting the film breathe. And and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has a massive amount of that.
It's
but
very
if you just let it flow a bit,
it's very
great.
just spend time in this like environment. It's like
It's an era he's in love with, so he's just enjoying recreating it. So many of his favourite films, film stars, music, and everything is from that era. It's because it's set in 1969, obviously. And I think that's why he's just like, oh, let's see some more of it. And I've recreated that building and so on. Yeah,
that's cool. I mean, going back to this from Becca was talking earlier about the cast, and
yeah.
obviously those three are fantastic. But there's also interesting kind of bit parts from people who were in the previous two films as well, and it's nice to see them kind of pop up in new roles, but still kind of make their own of it. And some of them are kind of diametrically opposed as to what they were in previous films, so they're not just like henchmen and stuff like that, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's a masterpiece.
Oh yeah, sorry. Thanks for that, Charlie. Sorry to have missed that out. That's quite interesting. I didn't realise.
I only know by name because it's a couple of months ago now, and honestly, the side characters in this film just don't. I wouldn't say they don't stand out to me, but they don't stand out to me as, oh, I remember him because it's been a few months now.
Yeah, I've recognised the big heavy from the last film, because he basically plays like a similar sort of like the big heavy of the from.
He could have been, because I do remember talking about one of the previous films, and I likened one of the heavies in that to a guy that was in the TV series Deadwood, and that was a heavy set guy with dark hair.
Yeah, well,
and I think it's the same guy that he's chained to on the railway in this one.
Yeah, that guy.
But it would need to be pointed out to me.
He played 3 different roles in all 3 films. Mario Braga, and he was Nino, the big henchman of India in the previous film, and now you've got another guy, the guy who plays Chupo's brother, Luigi Pastilli, who in the last film was Groggy, the
I recognise him now.
The friend of another friend of India's.
Yeah. Chris, what about you in this film? Did you see it before? Can't remember what we said now about previous ones.
Yeah, so before now, I've only seen this once before, and it was like years ago, basically like the other two, really. So that's about where I came. It's one of those films where I've watched and I thought, oh my god, this is great, and then for some reason you just never return to it. So even though I had it on Blu-ray, I had a box set, but I just never actually went back to it. So it's one of the good things about doing these podcasts. You can actually, it gives you a good reason to actually watch them. So yeah, that's basically where I was beforehand. As regards to First Floors, it's the thing that strikes me the most is like the music. And like the music itself is just like iconic, even if you don't realise that it's from Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I mean, a lot of people think they're wah, wah, but it's like everything else is sort of that's instantly recognisable and epic, as you said. What struck me as interesting is like, despite this being like the quintessential Western title, title Western, but if you ask people, name me Western, Good, the Bad, the Ugly would be like one of them popular answers. Yes. And it's very like not like most Westerns. Like it's not your stereotype. Well, I mean, at times it doesn't even resemble. Like most of the time, it doesn't even resemble a Western. Because a lot of it's set at the back of the Civil War. There's there's a lot of stuff going on. You basically got these 3 characters and they're chasing gold. Usually it's like a Western's almost set like the other side in a small town somewhere. There's a sheriff and all these kind of tropes. This has none of that, and it doesn't. and in a way, it doesn't sort of feel like your stereotypical Western. And that's one of the things that struck me the most about it, is that it just feels like a very different beast altogether. That it's like you wouldn't necessarily sort of, when you think of like, oh, I'm going to sit down and watch a Western, I wouldn't necessarily think about watching The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I'd watch it on it for its own terms, rather, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me. I mean, it's funny, it's a 3-hour film, but if you think back to For a Few Dollars More, we actually see them pick up their bounties. Whereas here we don't, because it's not important and we got quite a lot to get through. That said, we don't get through it particularly fast. I mean, nobody speaks for about, I think Lee Van Cleef is the first to speak, and it's either just before or just on 10 minutes into the film. The sort of first act explaining how Clint and Eli work together doesn't end until about half an hour into the film. I mean, it really does take its time actually setting its scenes. And we have a long time with them sort of one deserts the other, and then them getting dehydrated and getting somewhere else takes a long time. So it's quite languid, but it doesn't throw in a lot of superfluous stuff. It just tells us what it needs to tell us. It just doesn't hurry about doing it. So we don't really meet many sheriffs or anything like that. We are not focused on one guy's interaction with the town, as we get in a lot of these films, but even something as late as Unforgiven, where it's either the town's perspective on somebody coming into town or somebody's perspective on going into a town. It's one extreme or the other, and it's neither here. I mean, it's not even set in one place for that. It's it's a more expensive film. It's double the price of last week's and 6 times the price of for the first film. Its take at the box office significantly higher than either. Different writers again. Agents what are they called again? Agent Scarpelli, who tended to write a lot of comedies. And just the whole tone and feel of it's different, but a lot of it is that score. And the funny thing is, it's of a piece in its main theme. It just feels like the next one on, even though it's more iconic. But like Charlie said, you suddenly get you get the final showdown at the end, and there's a grandiosity that wasn't there in the first 2 films, which felt so much smaller. So it's a different beast, and it's things like, it doesn't matter which side's which. We're not invited to have a view on Confederacy versus the sort of unionists, I suppose. Apologies, Americans, if I've got those terms wrong, but you know what I mean. Staying in the Union versus seceding, the South versus the North, or other way around.
It's sort of something that's just happening in the background, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's just,
when I say we're not invited to have a view, I'm not saying because the people involved in this film wouldn't have a view. I'm sure they weren't wrapping themselves in the Confederate flag, but it just doesn't matter. They need the help of whoever comes along. So when someone comes along, they need their help. They suddenly shout for the Confederacy. They realise, shit, that's the North, or vice versa. And it doesn't matter. It's a battle, and they have no view on it. They walk into it. You see it in some, I was thinking of a video game I don't particularly like, a relatively modern Assassin's Creed game, Odyssey, where you go around as a mercenary, and you can be on the Spartan side, you can be on the sort of Greek side, the Achaean side, whichever, and it doesn't matter. And you're not really invited to have a view. It's whatever it's whatever accelerates your path through what you're doing, and it's the same here. So again, it's part of this whole deconstruction of, it's not actually about morality. It's about what is it you want in life. That none of these are good compared to the other. You could theoretically put sort of Eli Wallach as the bad, as he was in the original trailer, for the simple reason that he's the one being bounty hunted by the other two. But it doesn't really matter. They're all after some gold. It's as simple as that. And they don't care whose gold it is or where it is or who they have to interact with to get to it. So I think just for me, those are effectively my first thoughts. I mean, just to do it in reverse, my first exposure to the film, I've mentioned this before, but I had a box set of the 3, and the transfers were so bad that by the time I got to this one, I was almost starting to check out of it, because 3 hours of an incredibly grimy cover, and I'd really liked the second film as well. I couldn't warm to this as much. And then I saw the restored version, which sort of started me on the path of liking it more, but I was by that time I was in love with Once Upon a Time in the West, and maybe there is room for only one, I don't know. And then I watched it in prep for this month and a half ago when we were originally going to record it, and it was a click. And I mentioned it to Charlie because Charlie would understand this as my example in a different way and to a different degree. It was like Star Trek the Motion Picture. In the Star Trek the Motion Picture, I never hated. I found slow, but I was always like, it didn't do a massive amount for me. I like the score. I like some of the stillness of it. Kirk actually going, that 6 minutes of Kirk flying around the Enterprise and then finally docking and getting on it. The people that think the bit that people think is the boring, motionless bit of the film was the bit that transfixed me. But there was no doubt I found it relatively lifeless compared to what followed. And then I watched it in preparation for when we did it all those years ago, and it clicked. It was just like, oh, I get it. Right, brilliant. And I had that sort of experience with this about 6 weeks ago. Now, today, I left it until today to watch it. And again, because it had been too long. And I left myself with 3 hours of it to do this morning because I was going out this afternoon. And I really wasn't in the mood for a film. And on that basis, I was caught in disaster. I was caught in this is going to be a terrible viewing and I want to fast forward through. And it got me within about 10 minutes again. And I sat and watched it happily before I went out. I was going to watch a bit before and a bit after. I watched it all this morning between about 10 and 1. And I really, really like it. It's a superb piece of work. It's lost that slight cheapness of the first two. It's not as lavish as a Once Upon a Time in the West. The score isn't either as grand as it is. It doesn't have the, I don't know, is romance the word? I don't know. Elegance, maybe? I don't know. Maybe we can talk about that in a couple of minutes.
Operatic.
Possibly. That could be it. But it has a grandiosity, but it's not quite as prestige, and I can't maybe express.
Yeah, I think operatic is probably the best way to put it. That seems a great way to encapsulate it, for sure.
It's definitely... It's gone a step ahead of the first two for me now, and I expected it to finish in the middle. A Fistful of Dollars, the relatively cheap, knocked out sort of proof of concept for a few dollars more was the film I really loved, and this one, it's a bit too long, but I like it. No, quite the contrary. This is a superb piece of work. I love
it. Well, standing ovation.
So, what we're covering next week? Joking.
Oh, hang on a minute. Has everyone done first thoughts?
I think we have.
Have we? Okay. Well, I didn't realise that, folks. I thought we'd all done.
Charlie,
we
Chris,
did.
Dave.
All right. So we're all fairly fond of it. Shall we discuss this film sequentially?
It's a long film. Hopefully, we can be done.
So, is it a long film but with a relatively short plot? Or...
I don't worry this is going to be an excessively long show because I don't think it's that complicated.
I think
another one of those that you could
you
could agonise on beats like any film. It's got a lot happens, but it's not in service of a huge amount. This is three guys after some money, and we've got a few little wrinkles as to how they interact with each other, how they're together, how they get put onto the money, and how they require each other at different times during the plot to keep their search on track. That's the wrinkles in the film. It's not a difficult plot.
No. I mean, do we open with what is essentially like the first sort of title card introductions for characters? We've got you're introduced to the ugly and it's like freeze frame and you get the name.
Isn't that after the music? Don't we get the credits first? I can't remember.
Yes, we do get credits.
Get the title sequence first. But yes, we get a who they are first. The first is Eli Wallach, who is the ugly Tuco, and he's basically being hunted down as he's a bank robber basically. And we see him in the midst of one of his crime. He kicks someone out of a window. That's the first we see of him. And he actually wounds someone we will see later in the film. And he's being hunted now on first look. He's being bounty hunted by Clint Eastwood's character Blondie, who is the good. But obviously that we're going to find out a little bit different here. But we don't meet him immediately, do we? We meet Tuco first, who is basically a bank robber.
Mm-hmm.
Do we see Angel Eyes, the bad, before we see Clint?
Yes, it goes in order.
Yeah.
But like
Well, it goes in
so
reverse.
ugly, yeah, ugly,
reverse.
bad.
So the middle one is Angel Eyes, and he is searching for. He seems to be aware of the specific money first. He is searching for a trunk of gold owned by a Confederate soldier, a guy called Bill Carson. Now, Bill Carson had a different name at the point where he knew him. He was called something Jackson. Whether that's an inside reference, I don't know. If you look at your American history, but there you go. Now, this is where I don't know if they're talking. I don't know if the amounts of money in this film are translated to sort of more modern amounts, so they mean something to an audience, because it's worth about $200,000, which seems absurd for 1800 and something. But I suppose if they were chasing $4.50, that might be a bit underwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that because these movies with these like sort of bounties, and you're thinking like, hang on, like, does anyone actually have that? Does that amount of money exist back then?
I don't know, but it always reminds me of Austin Powers. I want $100 million,
Yeah.
and they fall about laughing.
Yeah, just an obscenely large
that
amount
sort
of
of
money.
money doesn't exist in the world.
But
No.
it's like this, yeah. Because if you think about it, like someone's like even got like $500, like most people would like back then would like, well, I'll retire to like a big massive house somewhere, and like
Yeah, that was a lot of money back then, I'm sure.
You've only got to go to
how much would it be today?
our grandparents' generation. They're like, if they bought houses, they bought their first house for £650 or something.
yeah.
Bargain. These days it's unheard of. But yeah, like how much would it be like in today's money? I'm sort
I
of.
don't know. But then we looked at George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life when he offers him $20,000, and we did like that. We looked it up, and it was like 700,000 or something. It was ridiculous. All right, so things inflate at different rates, anyway. But anyway, okay. So he's interrogating somebody to find this guy because he knows of this money, and basically he ends up killing the guy, having found out his name. He's now a guy called Bill Stevens, and he kills him and his boss. And he's basically off now looking for this Bill Carson character. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. We have the the long drawn out the opening kind of reminded me of The Searchers. Well, his introduction, not the opening really, but like with him like sort of stood in the doorway. There was a little bit of The Searchers in there, I thought, but yeah, very different to how he was last episode. Lee Van Cleef.
A little bit. The last film he reminded me of his turn in Sabata, a bit more of the gentleman killer. There's less of it here. But that's just choices, in design and all the rest of it. But yeah, then we go on to Tuco and Blondie, and I love this. At this point, this reminds me of the second film because we are down in the sort of area of the $2,000 bounty, and basically he's going town to town, raising his notoriety everywhere and becoming more and more wanted. And then he's being sort of delivered by Blondie to the local sheriff. They're collecting the bounty. And then as he's about to be hanged, Blondie will be somewhere out in the hills and he'll shoot the rope and then they'll escape. And they're just repeating this in every town. And I really love this. And it was the first thing I remembered about this film, that they kept pulling this trick. And this, it takes half an hour for all of what we've just said to play out. But as with the previous film, we've just had like perfect introduction to the three of them. That tells us everything we need to know about them.
There's a very much like a love-hate relationship between these two. Probably more hate, but
well, they need to. Obviously, Tuco is a fairly accomplished thief, and he's got a hint of brutality about him. He's quite happy to run in and rough up places, whereas Clint is more from distance and an excellent shot. So their skill sets complement each other. But then it ends up with Blondie gets fed up with him and just leaves him in the desert.
So where do we go from there?
I don't know what you thought of all this, Charlie, but this is there's this sort of whole middle section of the film did seem a little needlessly complex because you've got him leaving Tuco, and then Tuco having to find his way back and wanting revenge, and then him leaving Blondie, and Blondie like getting dehydrated and then having to recuperate somewhere, and then getting caught. Sorry to do the whole plot in a potted. Well, we'll go back over it, but a lot of that seems almost unnecessary.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of...
It's enjoyable.
Yeah. I guess it's more a character thing, and it's because again, it kind of shows some of the kind of Civil War backdrop as well, but also that Tuco isn't just the kind of comic relief, I guess.
No, because he's got a brutality that he will strike back, and he nearly has it. But I think that's what we're saying. Is the plot complex? No, I've just told you 70% of their plot, lacking most of the detail.
It's about character.
Yeah. So the first thing, he leaves Tuco. Tuco has to sort of get out of the desert by himself, and he's also had his money taken from him. Then he catches up with Blondie and just forces him to walk through the desert with him until he collapses with dehydration. And actually the makeup's really well done for 1966. Go and look at what TV makeup was like at the time, the sort of burnt face. Go and look at like Star Trek in this era or something on TV. It's really good for not a massive budget film. And so he's drinking water and just washing his shoes and stuff in front of him to taunt him.
Yeah, knocking it away as he's like sort of kind of pretends to offer it to him and shit like that.
But in the midst of all this, now the bit I've lost is how have they heard? Is Bill Carson well known? This is where they learn.
He says in exchange for water, you'll be a rich man.
Right. Yeah. So at this point, what's he called? The bad.
Oh, Angel Eyes.
Angel Eyes, the actor. Lee Van Cleef.
Yeah.
So at this point, Lee Van Cleef's already in search of this money. These two don't know about it. They're just playing their stupid tricks on each other. But as they're there and he's dying, basically, a sort of hospital ambulance, effectively, a horse-drawn carriage pulls up with a load of Confederate soldiers in it. And amongst them is a guy with an eye patch on, Bill Carson. Now, we know this name because it's been set up by establishing Lee Van Cleef's character arc and story. And he basically says to Tuco, if you can save me, give me water, everything else, there is money in this Confederate gold, 200,000, and it's in a grave, and he tells him which cemetery it's in. And then when he returns with water, he's already died, but he's told Blondie which grave. So you've got
instantly got like the power demo. It's like back again.
They need each other.
Yeah.
Now I don't think he knows where. Now Lee Van Cleef doesn't know where it is at all. He just knows the name, and that it's in an unmarked grave somewhere. And of these two, one of them knows the graveyard, and one of them knows the grave, but not the graveyard. So he's dead. So now he can't leave Blondie to die. So they have to go somewhere to recover. And he goes to a place that Tuco's brother works in. How the different families live. One of them's a crook and the other one's a priest.
Now it's presented as it was like a choice. Like you had two choices: if you did this or you did what I do.
Yeah, I think so. But none of this fantastically interested me. I mean, obviously, to start with, when he first caught up with Blondie, he was going to kill him, and because the Civil War keeps impeding on them, their story, it's all about their story. But because they're in the midst of the Civil War, it just shows up now and again. It will show up near the end, but like he was about to die. The Confederacy soldiers turned up dying. That interrupted and influenced their story. Before that, he was about to hang Blondie, and they got hit by a cannon because there was a battle going on in the town. So now they're recovering, and they end up leaving the monastery once he recovers and decide that they're going to go search for the gold together. And now we hit on the next time the sort of Civil War impedes upon them. And this is like pure comedy. A load of soldiers are on the way. They encounter a load of soldiers, and Tuco goes, "What's the name of their leader?" And starts yelling Confederate statements. And it turns out to be a Union patrol.
Because they're all dusted with.
Because they were dusted, so it was a different colour. And they
I
end
thought
up.
that scene was really clever. The reveal of that was really. He kept on saying, "Oh yeah, down with Lee, down with General Grant, rah rah," and then they sort of dust themselves off.
Which
and
one
like,
is it,
what,
Lee? Yeah.
What did you say? You know?
Mhm.
I think that's really cleverly done. It's kind of obviously there are some really sort of quite heavy moments, and this film is quite brutally violent. You know, as common in these films. But I think it was good to have. You know, it's a masterstroke by Leone definitely to have that kind of real comedic like relief kind of moment, and like, oh bugger, you know. I found that quite amusing. But yeah, it's just one of the things you think, you know, they're sort of making all these.
If I had to have one complaint with it, it would just be from a pacing perspective. It seems like we've gone from Clint incapacitated and having to recover, and it almost doesn't matter if it's a prison or a hospital. Do you know what I mean? It really doesn't matter which it is. He's out of commission.
It just sort of drag out a little bit. I would agree.
And then they get out of there and they're locked up again straight away. They might as well have broken out of a prison into a prison.
Yeah, it's a bit from kind of, you know, from one to the other, really, isn't it? I would kind of agree. But I think it's a nice moment where it just allows that kind of sequence to break up a little bit. But I think that reveal is done quite well, I think. I just thought I'd pop up and say hello.
Hello. And then so basically they're in prison, and this is, Charlie, you tweeted on this earlier. This is probably the most brutal section of the film.
Yeah, tell us about this one.
It took me by surprise because the film's been largely funny so far.
So you've got Angel Eyes. Because I was always confused by this as a kid, whether or not he was a Confederate officer or whether he was just pretending to be one. Because he's a sergeant, so he's at quite a high level.
Union, isn't it? They're Union. That's how they got.
Sorry, Union. Sorry.
Yeah. No, they were just with the Confederacy, to be fair, or shouting it.
Yeah. But he's a sergeant, and his right-hand man is a guy called Wallace, who was Mario Braga, who was the big guy, the big henchman in the previous film. India's big henchman.
Yeah, and as we said, probably something of an influence on the similar character in Deadwood. Yeah.
And he knows that he's Tuco, and he knows Blondie. So they've all three have.
Bear in mind, they're pretending to be Bill Carson.
Bill Carson, yeah.
Because they've taken his eye patch and taken some of the Confederate clothing, and they basically said, "Oh, I'm Bill Carson," after several attempts of avoiding admitting who they were.
Yeah. And here's Angel Eyes looking for Bill Carson, so it's.
Yeah, I'm Bill Carson, so is my wife.
Oprah.
It's a little bit like that, isn't it? Like the alias is passed along to try and, you know, provide anonymity and a bit of protection. But yeah, I felt I'm really sorry. I do apologise. I did feel it was a little bit like I'm Spartacus and so is my wife, and I was like, oh really? So, but anyway, sorry to interrupt, Charlie. You carry on.
No, that's right. But because he knows Bill Tuco, so he knows he is not Bill Carson, but because he's got the name, he takes him and his friend away. He gives him food. He pretends to be nice, and then his henchman kicks the shit out of him, and it's really brutal. And it really gets to a point where he kind of puts his thumbs in his eyes, and it's really hard to watch.
That's torture, and I think we made another point. We were talking about it online earlier as we were. Well, I think Charlie saw it last night because he posted on social media he'd seen it, and I watched it this morning, as I said, and I think Becca was watching it. I think this afternoon as I was finishing it, something like that. And I took a photo. I made a joke about it because on a still image, it looked like he was covered in food or something. It was just a joke off one still image. It didn't look like it in the moving film. But it looked like he could have spilt like a dessert on himself or something. Only works as a still image though. And I said something about that, and she said this is surprisingly brutal. She said an hour later, and I said, well, I think a lot of it is the budget. In the previous two films, it was largely shooting at distance anyway, but they'd shoot, and it was like, if you've ever gone and seen one of these stunt shows, there's a place in this country somewhere. I forget what it's called, like Frontier City. It may not be there now because I went when I was a kid, and they would do like Western shootouts, like as live shows. And
is that where they filmed that Red Dwarf episode that's set in the Wild West?
It could have been. I think that there's probably more than one in the country, and it may not have been the closest one to me. This one's a couple hundred miles from me. It's probably quite close to you, Becca, somewhere.
Yeah, I'll have to
but Anyway, Frontier City it was called. Now, there's photos of me there as a kid and stuff like that. But of course, when they're all shooting each other, they're doing these shows every hour, so they're not going to cover themselves in squibs because they've got to do it again an hour later. So everything has that theatrical, just playing sort of cowboys and Indians as kids kind of feel to it. And the first two films had that. Now all of a sudden we're seeing blood and injury detail and burns. And we've got a close-in torture scene. And once you start sticking your thumbs in people's eyes, all right, it may not be the most graphic, but we can all imagine what that feels like.
Yeah, I did kind of find that quite the scene like difficult to watch, especially because you've got the contrast with the. I must admit, I'm not familiar with the song. I do apologise, but it was sounded to me kind of like a battle hymn or like a certainly slower paced song being played by the military band in the background. So you've got this horrible, brutal beating going on to this kind of really slow paced, almost hypnotic sort of hymn almost sort of going on in the background, and to me the contrast was quite jarring. But yeah, I don't know why I was so surprised by the violence, considering the last two films, and considering we've come through the Bond film, which kind of, you know, is obviously a lot of violence, death, destruction, rape, things like that. It's quite interesting doing some research about this film, but I keep wanting to say Eli Wallach, but it's not him. Lee Van Cleef. There was an interview, and apparently he said what sort of three principles that he had, especially as a movie villain. In his films, he wouldn't slap women or, you know, hit sort of female actresses. Any sort of, you know, female cast members that he was acting opposite.
Who said that? Sorry.
Lee Van Cleef, I believe.
Okay,
but basically, so he wouldn't sort of hit women and he wouldn't kick dogs as well. So no animal cruelty, and no slapping the ladies around. So I think there's a scene where he does kind of beat a female character, but I think it was done with a stunt because with a stunt actor, because he refused to do it just on the grounds, you know. And the actress was like, "Oh, no, it's fine. I'm just acting. It'll be okay." And he's like, "No, this is a principle that I must adhere to." But that kind of film scene, I had to sort of look away a little bit. But no, it's just, especially this film being like glorious Technicolor as well. I mean, it's still one of the most vibrant films certainly in the series, and you really have to kind of ramp it up as well. Especially, you know, coming through the Tarantino films that we did, it still quite surprised me with the violence of it. But it's done, you know.
Yeah, but
really
I didn't do a time check, but
in Europe,
it must have been after the 90-minute mark. It must have been. I can't remember now. But when you think of the flow of what happens in this film, we must be either approaching or in the second half of the film, and it's the first time we've seen violence like that.
Yeah,
so
it's quite shocking.
Out more. The film wasn't doing that close in hand-to-hand violence. It wasn't.
No, but you see obviously, like, you know, dead bodies, and you see obviously a lot of shooting, and like there's a scene where he basically shoots. I
would characterize it more that what you had more in this film than the previous two films was a sense of threat and peril.
Yeah.
So
and lots of red paint.
So they were hanging from ropes, and you're like, will he shoot it in time? And you could almost feel yourself getting out of breath watching it and choking, and the sweat and all that sort of thing. And the bit where he's about to kill, and then of course Clint gets like badly burnt on the face and dehydrated, and it's all much more visceral than the first two films, but it's not disturbing in the same way.
I would say like that the biggest takeaway from this film is certainly all the costumes and the makeup as well. It's one of those things where, like, if you start to realise those sort of things, it takes you out of the film. But I think for me, just gives you a greater appreciation of it as well. The fact that it's kind of shown in more detail. There is injury detail. There is a lot more blood than what we've seen. A lot of the films that we've covered previously on this series have been quite cartoony, like the Bond films, for example. Or unless we do things like any sort of like body horror or stuff like that, I probably won't be around for. That, you know, is kind of more graphic. I'm always impressed by how, you know, the hair and makeup and sort of step up to really provide that kind of more realistic, to show the horrors of the war, of the US Civil War as well. So that's something I didn't even mention, unfortunately, being an American history studies graduate. So I'm a bit ashamed at that. So it's quite interesting to kind of just show the horrors of war as well, and show like the violence of it and the futility of it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's just, the Civil War is just the backdrop, isn't it? I mean, they managed to get themselves out of this. How did they escape? I can't remember.
So Angel Eyes is torturing Tuco, and Tuco doesn't give him the name, or does he? Yeah, Tuco gives him the name of the cemetery in the end.
Right.
Yeah, but he says he's with Blondie, and Angel Eyes knows that Blondie won't talk.
Right, so it's
because
now...
he knows he'll die anyway.
We're now at the point they all need each other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so and then they go and like sort of they don't necessarily kill Tuco there and then, but they basically sort of chain they chain to be sent to be executed or sent somewhere, like, you know, in a Confederate jail, so he's like out of the way.
Yeah.
That's why he's like chained up to the guy and he ends up escaping.
Yeah, again, even that's a brutal scene to just, you know, run over by a train and gone by then. But yeah. Okay, so we're now at the point where they know the cemetery and the grave between them. And so they've all got to get there together. And of course, there's a pitched civil war battle on the bridge, over which the other side is the cemetery they need to get to. So then we've got. Am I jumping too far ahead to say we've now at a point where they need to blow this bridge?
Well, there's a bit where so Angel Eyes is with Blondie, although reluctantly, though like it reveals that Angel Eyes has like a bunch of guys with him.
Yeah.
Yes. Which I'm assuming he's planning on killing.
Yes, he is. He's waiting till the second he gets the information that he can use, and then he can kill him off.
No, but his other mates though, like the
yeah.
And while Tuco is chasing up with them because they kind of know where they're going. Again, this is like there's little bits. So like one of the guys at the beginning who tries to kill Tuco or tries to capture Tuco, sneaks up on him while he's in the bath. And he shoots him. That's where you have like rips off Die. Well, this is what Die Hard ripped
Call
off.
back
Like
at the start of the film, and it's also reminding you of the Perils Inn. There's
Yeah.
people chasing him for everywhere. He's robbed banks everywhere. He's pissed people off everywhere, and he's hurt people everywhere as well. So there's quite a long list of people after him.
And so there's that, but Blondie. There's a bit of a sort of shootout with Blondie and the other guys.
Yeah. Which does feel a bit padding, but all right.
Like we need a body count. Yeah, because then that's when like Tuco and Blondie get back together again.
Yeah. Okay. So then we go to the sort of pitch battle in the bridge. And have you got this in your fun facts, Becca? This bridge.
My fun facts actually contain no bridge facts.
Ah, right. Well, this bridge, when
I thought we might discuss it. I've got potential controversial facts.
They blew the bridge, but it was a miscommunication over the radios, so it got blown without the cameras rolling. Nope. So the guy who gave the order to blow it, or appeared to, got fired, and then they all agreed to sort of get it rebuilt on the basis that guy got. Yeah, so they built it and blew it twice. This bridge. Again, this bit of the film feels slightly busy work. The key point is they do get across to the cemetery, and again they're double crossing each other left, right, and centre. Tuco thinks he's got the right name, the name of Arch Stanton, so he goes running across to try to find it. He's having cannon shot at him by Clint.
That's quite a tense scene, though, I think, isn't it? When he's kind of he does a loop, where he appears to do a loop. You know, he's searching out for the gravestone, and the fact that he sort of can't find it immediately, and he's sort of running here, there, and everywhere. I kind of feel like we're kind of getting lost with him. I know that's really stupid, but I kind of feel like we're sort of trying to hunt it down with him, and we're trying to think where is it, in that desperation. Also, whilst he's having pot shots taken at him, so it's a very tense scene for sure.
The gist is they get there first, or as he gets there to start digging up the grave, Clint gets to him and sort of has a gun at him, orders him to dig, and then Lee Van Cleef has got a gun to him. So the three of them are there, and when he digs it up, it's just a body that's not there, so he doesn't have the name. And then we're right at the end now. Clint says he writes it on a rock. He says, I'll write the name of the person whose grave it is, and put it in the middle of this quite conveniently placed place to have a duel in the middle of this big sort of circle that they can have a duel in.
Circle with no graves.
Yeah, just in the middle of the
no
graveyard,
grave,
just in case the dead want to have a duel. And he writes the name, and then we have the duel. And what do we want to say about this? Really, it's very standard for these types of films. We do see these across all the Morricone, all the Leone films with the Morricone score.
Is this kind of where it comes from, though? It's one of those scenes. It's again, it's iconic. I use that term quite a lot, so I'm sorry. But it's iconic, and it's become a kind of a trope, isn't it? Is this kind of where it got started? Is this where we see it first? Does anybody know?
Charlie, you know westerns better than me.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, yeah, I think probably this is probably one of the most famous kind of scenes for it.
I think the fact there's 3 of them.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Mexican standoff thing was a real thing.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, no, definitely.
But this is probably one of the most famous example of it. And what Tarantino borrowed, it was homaged with in Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Although there's another film he took that from. But anyway, the final act of Reservoir Dogs is largely from another film. But yeah,
it's probably like one of Hong Kong, isn't it? Like,
it is.
Yeah, when it's Hong Kong.
City on Fire.
I couldn't remember if it's Hong Kong or Japan. It is City on Fire. You're absolutely right. I couldn't remember if it was Hong Kong, Japan, or Korea. It's City on Fire, absolutely. And I will have said that at the time when we recorded it, but it's a few years ago now. If you think back to the first film, it was a shootout in the town. I think this sort of out of town, away from everyone else, possibly. It's more the fact that it's a Mexican standoff. They could all point at each other and all kill each other at the same time, as it turns out. Clint is pointing at Lee, shoots him, gets his shot off first. Lee is pointing at Clint, so obviously he's in no danger, and Tuco's gun's been unloaded by Clint the night before without him knowing. So he's shot into a grave.
I mean, it's poor form not to check, isn't it, before you go. I mean, that could have gone horribly wrong. Where like as they're squared up, he's looking at going, hang on, I've got the fucking bullets here.
Or Tuco noticed it half hour before and just reloaded his gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there you go. So there's just the 2 of them left. And this is always the bit I didn't quite understand, because when I first watched this film, I know it sounds daft because it's in a lot of shots, but probably it was at the end of 3 hours and I didn't have the greatest viewing on the very first time. I don't think I appreciated he left Tuco with money. So I'm like, why are you threatening to hang him and all that? You've left him with his share. So basically, he hangs him, leaves him standing on the top of a gravestone with his share of the money, and disappears off. And then just before he's about to fall off this grave and hang himself, Blondie shoots him from distance and then just rides off into the sunset. We always say rides off into the sunset. We've got no proof the sun's about to set, but there you go. I don't understand this hanging in business. Is it just to basically say stay away from me? Is it to stop him trying to steal Clint's share so they carry on forever?
Well, the whole running through the whole film. I think we've probably glossed over it a bit. Is the kind of subplot of these 2 getting one up on each other?
Yeah.
And where it's come of, you can see kind of also the kind of elements of what would eventually become the buddy comedy.
Yeah, and I do wonder if it's a good way to sign off, because they've literally been stealing from each other or putting themselves in situations where one could die.
Yeah.
Whereas here, he's released him, he's got money. He hasn't got a ride, admittedly, so I don't know quite how that works. But I suppose it's a way to say, I won in the end, let's leave it there.
Exactly, and he is supposed to be the good in inverted commas. But because it was previously when Blondie and Angel Eyes were in the town. That was Tuco. After Tuco shot that guy, he turned up and got the one up on Blondie. With that great scene where you hear them, where he hears the spurs.
Yeah.
And again, it's the sound there with the marching band outside, and he's loading his gun with all his bullets, and then he hears the spurs of all the men outside his hotel room. And again, that's something that's been in so many films since.
And I think a lot of what I like about westerns are the sounds. You know, the walking on wooden planks, the spurs, the sort of guns being cocked, horses, coupes, all that sort of thing. And I think the soundscapes of the sort of spaghetti westerns uniformly are a little less clean, and I like it. I like it as a result. So yeah, that's really our plot. Lee Van Cleef killed off, and Tuco sort of split in with half of the money each, but the good Blondie having the sort of one up on the situation.
Yeah, I think also with Blondie being the good, I think he's the one out the three who displays the most humanity. I think that kind of happens as the film progresses. So, like, you know, obviously going through all the war, particularly the thing at the bridge, he also says a line that says like basically how like just complete just waste of men, like of life this is. Yeah. I forget what the line is particularly, but then there's the bit afterwards where he offers where he just comes across just a dying soldier. I forget whether it's Confederate or
I know, and he gives him when they get into the graveyard, and he gives him his cheroot to smoke, and he dies within seconds. I think that is a byproduct as well of not making a judgment on which side is which. It doesn't really matter. It's just senseless death that they're just strolling through.
Because because of kind of, again, maybe glossed over it a bit, but when they go to the prison camp or the base where the bridge is, they ask the I suppose is the Confederacy there, where they say, "What are you doing here?" And Tuco, before Blondie gets there, I think Tuco says, "We came to enlist." And then there's a captain there, and he's drinking, and I think it's the closest thing Leone gets to kind of really moralizing about the war, about the kind of senselessness of all the death in the war as well. And it's the captain. I'm pretty sure it is the captain that you see dying.
Yeah.
Later on,
because it's one of the things he says. He says like, "Oh, I'd blow that whole thing up," you know.
Yeah, because again, morality. They steal a stretcher from an injured man, so they can carry the explosives across to the bridge.
Yeah.
It's almost like a kind of Laurel and Hardy kind of bit, that with both of them running over with the stretcher and putting explosives on it, while all these soldiers in the background are blowing each other up.
Yeah,
I mean, it's played completely straight, but this film is inadvertently, well, not inadvertently, by design, it's very funny in places.
It's absurd, yeah, absolutely.
There's an absurdity to it, exactly that. They're walking through a war zone, and they're just obsessed with their own thing, which is money, which is in itself ridiculous. I mean, they're watching blokes race into each other and slaughter, and they're thinking, "Yeah, we ought to bomb that bridge because we need to get over there." It's
the bit where what Becca was talking earlier when we were talking about the with the band, and where Wallace and Angel Eyes beat up Tuco, is where the music, that song is a song that was written by Marconi for the film, called "The Story of a Soldier," and I think you hear it in the score as well as in the in that way diegetically when the band are playing it.
Yeah.
And you've got Blondie with all the other soldiers, and the soldier next to him says that they've all been through it. So while they're kicking the shit out of Tuco because he wants them to talk, it also underlines Angel Eyes' brutality, because this is something he does anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. They're just used to this life. I mean, you almost wonder now in the modern world, we'd get prequels to this. You know, how did they get to where they were and all that kind of nonsense?
Yeah.
But it's the sort of thing that, like, it does interest me. You just think, like, how did they end up like this in the middle of, you know, because there is humanity there. You know, Clint actually does give some sort of manly comfort to a dying man. And in 1960s terms, that he might as well be giving him a hug. He might as well be holding him as he dies. Do you know what I mean, Charlie? The sensibilities of this era, you know, he's really given him he's really given him comfort here. And you think, well, the film didn't need to do that. It's telling us something. Yeah. And I don't think this is a big message film, but why put it in? It's there for something, and you do naturally start thinking, how did he end up like this? He actually cares about these people dying.
Yeah. And again, but there's the underlying thing there about greed.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I don't want to do is paint it as a message film.
No, which is why Leone is kind of obfuscates it a bit, and it's a very grey film.
But it's still giving you stuff to think about a bit.
I think that was the point, though. I think the point is, like, sort of saying this isn't black and white, however you want to paint.
Like that, but I love films like that where you can think about it or choose not to, and it doesn't actually affect enjoyment. If you want to see this as three guys like crossing and double crossing each other over money in what is almost a caper film in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And caper films have no real morality. Look at an Ocean's 11. What's the morality of that film? Zero. We're on their side. Hope they do it. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yes, they did. Ocean's 11's not necessarily a brilliant example because the Terry Benedict character's an asshole. The film does go out of its way to paint the guy they're stealing from as a dick. But
they all do that, though. Like,
but it wouldn't matter if he wasn't. We'd still be on their side.
It'll either be, if it's seen from a person that they always paint him as like a bad guy in some respects, so you don't feel bad. Or either that'll be we are generally in caper films on the side of people who aren't strictly doing the right thing. Fast Five is a caper film. They're robbing a bank. And this film can be watched as just that, and a very entertaining caper film because they're working together and double crossing each other. It's not even like they're strictly in competition and doing it. So that's great. But as they're going through a civil war, you can sort of think about that as well if you want. And that's something that gives the film a depth that it doesn't actually strictly need. But it's there if you want to see it.
You look at the previous film where Van Cleef and Eastwood working together. I mean, obviously it comes in the end of it that Van Cleef is really in it for revenge.
Yeah.
What happened to his sister, but it still kind of has that thing where they're both kind of working together against the other guys to get all the money.
And when we get to Once Upon a Time in the West, it's everyone working in their own self-interest. And one fairly decent woman at the centre of it all. Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of notable that this kind of film is kind of, maybe, I don't know if it's the epicenter, but what came with what are known now as revisionist westerns.
Yeah.
So because we're of the previous kind of, as Chris said, where it's a lot more moral, and the kind of the white hat, black hat stories of westerns, and then going from that to something again, similar stories, but the kind of the
vast majority of spaghetti westerns, the vast majority of, I would say, and I'm not an expert, but from the little bit I do know, I'd say, I mean, in terms of chronologically, this probably is the epicenter, in that there's a good number after this. Revisionist westerns. They run right into the early 70s. In quite high numbers. So this genre is still building itself at this point. And so many of them are about, less obviously so here, because it's still only the Civil War and there's a few decades of it to come yet. But it's almost like the end of a lifestyle, these revisionist ones. It's almost like, you'll see it with Once Upon a Time in the West. It's like that way of life is coming to an end. Why? Because of the coming of the railroad and things like that. So, and we'll talk about that during that film. But you could almost graft it onto this film that, like, this money's a way out of this life. Are they going to go around collecting these bounties off sheriffs forever, when the very forming of a union means that there aren't going to be these sort of ad hoc bounties forever anyway, because there'll be organised law enforcement for a start. We can't just, you can't just ride into town with a criminal. You think about in this country, you couldn't just ride into town with a criminal and say, give us a couple of thousand, I've got him in the bank. He's dead, but you can give me half of it.
Yeah. And then try it again the next time.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of these revisionist Westerns do hint at the death of a lifestyle, and there's a certain sadness to that. There's a certain sadness of... Yeah. And it almost goes with the casting as well, that they're not that young. I mean, relative to how people age, Clint's in his late 30s by now, which is like being late 40s now. Lee Van Cleef ain't a particularly young man, although he looks a lot older than he is. Eli Wallach wasn't a particularly young man either. And it's all, they've been at it a long time, and how long can they do it? Quite apart from everything else, as you age, how long would he be able to pull that trick of shooting Eli free? I mean, your eyesight don't get better with age. Your shooting doesn't get better with age. So they need a way out of this life anyway. And and it does tend to be death or glory. They either need control of whatever money they need to get out of it, or they'll exit in death.
Yeah,
like that gets. And the reason I think Once Upon a Time in the West is a better film, although a very different film with similar themes and similar characters, is all of that is much more at the fore. You can infer a lot more of that. A lot more is there. Yeah. But you can graft a lot of it onto this film.
And at the same time as well as Once Upon a Time in the West, you had the Wild Bunch as well, which is its theme about the West dying and old men.
I've only seen it once and I need to see it again. I used to have it on like a Blu-ray, watched it, loved it, but if you ask me, I can only picture a handful of scenes in it now. I need to watch it again. What year was the Wild Bunch, Charlie?
69.
Okay.
And also, without going too deep as well, a lot of these, certainly because you had in the 60s the rise of the Italian horror film as well, and the Italian polizieschi, the crime films. And in Italy,
I'm more familiar with the latter than the former.
Yeah, and Italy was kind of still fighting against fascism.
Yes.
And so there was all these stuff behind the scenes as well that you can kind of see in a lot of these films as well. Yeah. And certainly because of how violent they are.
Well, the Spanish still had fascism till the mid-70s, so we forget that. We think of it as something from a black and white era,
Yeah.
And not necessarily. But I mean, I know some of the Italian crime films because I've covered a few of them. Horror is, as we all know, not really my genre.
Yeah.
But I know that, and I love all that because, like I say, I think some of the things that are going on politically in the world now are so overtly referred to in films that it's almost reaching parody. And I don't mean it shouldn't be covered. I'm not talking about things like representation. I'm not talking about those things being in films. I'm talking about the lack of subtlety that you see here. Yeah. In that, what I mean by that, and I'm probably not explaining it very well, is you could almost miss all of those themes in these films, but they are there. And if you are so inclined to study it, you can actually be told a lot about what was going on in the world at the time.
Yeah.
Whereas now you don't even have to do that study. You can go, right, I can see exactly what they're going for here.
Yeah, and well now, yes, Bond villains are almost a reality.
Yes.
Elon Musk. How far away is he from Max Zorin?
Not very.
Well, we'll see if he ends up blowing up Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably only a matter of time.
Let's
hijacks a rocket,
Yeah, I mean,
his first tweet tomorrow morning. I've just done.
Is he hanging out with Grace Jones? Was he genetically engineered KGB spy? I don't know.
I've just done Grace Jones.
billionaire industrialist Elon Musk.
Yeah. I mean, but
As far as we're concerned, he's perfectly legitimate.
Yeah, I mean, I covered a few sort of these Italian 70s crime films recently, and you naturally go and sort of start reading about them, and it's going, well, this reflected that was going on at the time in the country, and even censorship standards. I mean, you go and cover some silent film, and you go, fuck me, this is quite adult, and you go, most of the stuff I watched had Hays Code.
Well, exactly. You go back and what was I listening to? And there's a podcast I was listening to, and they were looking at various like Screenshot, the Mark Kermode, Eleni Jones one. I've just discovered that. I know I'm a couple of years out of date. And it looks at a couple of Hays Code or like pre-code sort of films, and it's amazing what goes.
They're not as adult as that. It's that they don't even have to hide unmarried people might be having sex. Now it's not sexual. But it's the very fact you're seeing it in a film that predates an era where they couldn't even imply it.
Well, exactly. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Definitely.
Yeah.
And especially some of these films as well. Like, I mean, the level of violence in this film, for example, is perhaps maybe they couldn't show it in America at the time, but because it was made, in Europe. I think that's why, like Jellynet, for example, gained a bit more traction because it kind of made outside.
I don't think we didn't have. I think the first topless woman in a film post sort of the Hays Code was The Lovers, 1958. So it was a long time afterwards you started getting any adult themes, and this sort of level of violence only started ramping up after here, really.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, it's interesting. You kind of a lot of these kind of westerns or these kind of Western and these kind of films sort of come out sort of around now, like 60s, mid 60s, and start to kind of peter out, like all these classic kind of movies around this sort of time. And certainly, it's used more as like as an allegory of what was going on in the time, as you say, with fascism in Europe and Nazism and that sort of thing as well. So I think that's a really interesting point.
I think the other point it leads on is I think this is good advice in life, but you could almost apply it to the subgenre of westerns as well. Watch as many different types as you can, because if you watch a handful of spaghetti westerns by one filmmaker, they'll all end up in a shootout a bit like this, where they all stare at each other for like an age before they fire, and they will look formulaic, but anything but if you watch the entire if you watch a cross section of the genre.
Sorry, go on.
Go on, no, that's it.
It's just that's the thing with the kind of so many genre films. Like, so you've got westerns and horrors and stuff, where because they're seen as a lesser kind of film, then people can sneak a lot more in.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, like with these spaghetti westerns, they weren't seen as like art films. I mean, there's a lot of things they could get away with in this sort of film because they weren't viewed, as artwork, rather, so they can get away with a lot more.
No, it's not just that, Becca. It's the fact that they're not set in a contemporary era.
No, exactly.
And I think where Charlie might be going with that, whether he means it implicitly or explicitly, is Star Trek. Yes. Star Trek made all sorts of comments on racism, sexism, and politics.
That wasn't looked upon in that kind of way.
If Star Trek had been, it wouldn't have been, because it wouldn't have been the format.
If it's set in the modern day, they couldn't have got away with it. If it's set in
the mid-60s on a naval ship, they would not have got away with a tenth of what they were trying to do.
No, because it was set in outer space. They could have a naked green girl,
Yeah. Well,
it came the same year.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the same year as this film as well.
Well, exactly. This is it. Because of the outlandish setting, because the outer space setting, they can push that boundaries a little bit more. I think, certainly with these genres, kind of like sci-fi or horror, anything that's outside the mainstream, you can afford to kind of test the limits a little bit more, be a bit more shocking, be a bit more outlandish, and trying to push your agenda through, should you have one. But no, I was just thinking, like, in terms of these spaghetti western films, because they weren't seen as high art. And obviously now they're revered as classics, but I think Ebert reviewed it quite poorly at the time, and the like as well, and it was kind of panned upon its release, but because it wasn't seen as high art. But I see what you mean, Charlie. Sorry about that.
All of these things get to saturation point. Now, I forget who the hell I was listening to earlier, and they were talking about the stages of a genre. And how you set the rules, and then you go through this phase, and then you go through that phase, and the penultimate phase is deconstruction. The final phase is parody. And if you go and watch the newest Ant-Man film, they're slipping into parody. And I think that so westerns were always going to die.
You could say remakes fit in there somewhere. They'll be just end up being like
but
remade.
It isn't a strict rule anyway. It's only a theory. But the point I'm making is that if you follow, then this was late in the maturity cycle of westerns anyway. But part of the problem is if you watch the same type time and time again, they will start looking formulaic. But as we start talking about it and even expand it into talking about horror and crime and all the rest of it, all these themes and all the stories that you get in films can be attacked in so many different ways, and even in these films, and we'll cover a few in the coming weeks that are different, and some of them are covering the same themes but they're doing it in different ways. And it's but anyway, final thoughts on this from me. I think we've got a better one from Leone coming in a couple of weeks' time. I would put this top of the Dollars trilogy now, though. I had a really, really good time with it. I almost think for the sake of its scale and themes, it needed to be 3 hours, but in terms of its scene breakdown, it didn't. I like its languid pace, but him getting straight out of being sort of embedded care to being straight in prison was like a step too far for the film. But I really, really enjoyed it. I like the range of everybody in this as well. Lee Van Cleef always appears to be playing the same character, but he isn't. He's not playing the same character he was last time.
No. You can almost think it's a different actor completely, because
I mean, he's just got such a familiar facial structure that it couldn't be, if you like. There's no chance of him completely disappearing into roles because he's so distinctive to look at. But I really love Lee Van Cleef anyway. It's just like he could have easily have been the superstar of all of this. And I always remember when I did the Sabata films that with a bit more consistency and a bit more longevity after that in the Western genre, that could have easily become like another sort of quasi superhero or a Bond character easily. Because the way the character's revealed in the first film does put you in mind of the sort of slow way we get Indiana Jones revealed or Bond revealed at the Baccarat table in the first film and stuff. He could have been an even bigger star than he was, is what I'm saying. I think this is the strongest of the three. I don't think it's necessarily the most watchable. I certainly remember earlier today I was like, I've left this too late and I've got to do 3 hours of this now. So whilst I'll watch it again in my life, if you forced me at gunpoint to watch one now, I'd watch for a few dollars more. But of the first three we're covering in this series, this would be the objectively, I think, the best.
Yes, I had a great time with my viewing today. I'm just sorry that I've waited so long to see this classic movie. Something these sort of films I do kind of associate with both my late granddads, actually, because I think it's just the era that they grew up in, like war movies, westerns, that sort of thing. Sort of informed sort of things that they enjoyed growing up, and I think because it was always on, it sort of tried to pass it on to myself, but sadly it didn't stick. But I'm glad to be discovering them now for sure. And it's always great to connect with you guys as well, because I always end up coming away from our discussions learning a lot more, and I've come away having a richer experience because of it, and listeners, I hope you do the same. I certainly didn't pick up on the aspect of the buddy movie. Now it obviously it's glaringly obvious. About it,
yeah.
Definitely something I didn't pick up on as well.
I think what you wouldn't, sorry to interrupt, but it isn't that you wouldn't pick up the buddy elements. It's probably that you wouldn't pick up that didn't already exist as a thing.
In that, yeah, well, especially in that genre as well.
It's the groundbreaking element of it you wouldn't pick up. Not the
it really is.
If someone said to you, "Are there buddy elements in the film?" you'd go, "Yes, of course."
Well, of course.
Yeah.
For sure, definitely. But no, yeah, I've had a really good time with this viewing. It's a truly classic. I think there are, as Charlie said, there are aspects that we've kind of glossed over, but we could, if we wanted to, we could do a 3-hour job on this film. But that's for another day. But yeah, no, I have a really good time. I can definitely see why it's so classic and why it has I just got to repeat myself now. Or why it has kind of carried on through the ages. Like for me, if I was to rank it, I would rank this one at the top for sure. Looking forward to seeing what other films that we do in the genre.
Well, yeah. Anyway, sorry. Who's next?
I'll go next. Yeah. So, like Becca, I feel like kind of ashamed only sort of watching it once before.
Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one. I don't feel as bad now.
But no, it is definitely an epic classic. I'll say the only thing that I haven't really mentioned really is, I think is it Eli? I'm gonna butcher his last name. Is it
Wallach?
Wallach.
Wallach. Yeah.
I always
It's
feel.
pretty
I
much.
always
Well,
feel-
this, obviously CH in the English language can be pronounced ch, but it can also be k, and it is that k sound.
Yeah.
Wallach.
I know sometimes, like in the Italian language as well, like if you've got a C,
I know it
it's
sounds
H,
obvious, but
the
for
H makes
anyone,
the C like quite hard. So
for anyone who hasn't noticed, we have covered a film of his in the past. He was in The Godfather Part 3.
yep.
Yeah.
He's a very old man by that point.
I think he kind of steals the show. I mean, he's very loud.
Brilliant.
It's the
Yeah, he's
loudest.
fantastic, isn't he?
It's the loudest
Yeah.
of the three, which I think
Yeah.
is probably like the best description. Not that that sounds demeaning in a way, but I don't mean it that way. Because I
No, but
don't.
he's so vibrant and full of life. Do you know what? I wish I could watch this on the big screen just for him.
Yeah.
Because
I mean-
you know how I used to say forget acting quality, but you know how I used to say things like when you watch Samuel L. Jackson and that famous scene in Pulp Fiction, when you see it on the big screen, it metaphorically blows your hair back as you're watching it because the screen presence is immense. He's the same in Jackie Brown, right? But not so much in other films, but certainly those. Jungle Fever to a degree. But Wallach, I would imagine, has that. I would imagine he just pins you to your seat the moment that you see him.
Because while he is like, he's not. He is the ugly. He's probably the more like complex of the two, of the three. Because he isn't particularly like a virtuous character in the slightest, but you do kind of root for it. You do have like you understand him more. I think one of the things that that did stand out the three, he's the only one you kind of know. Like you know his backstory.
He's the bravest and most and least skilled and most cowardly and most skilled at the same time. That's the fascinating thing. He's a skilled bank robber, right? Whether he's just doing that with brutality, he's pulled off a lot of robberies with a lot of people chasing him, and yet he's always at the mercy of Clint, right?
Yeah.
But so he's almost frightened of Clint, and yet he'll ride straight into a bunch of soldiers and trust himself to bullshit his way through it. Fascinating character.
Yeah, I think because he's the one out of the three that you actually know the backstory of. The other three you don't. You don't really know where Blondie or the man with no name comes from. You don't really know where Angel Eyes really comes from, or why they are. But you understand.
Yeah, but that raises more questions than it answers because we think, oh, he's just a wrong 'un, and then you meet his brother's a priest, and you're like, okay, well, that's not an answer to it then.
Yeah, you kind of understand that it's like he's had a tough. He come from tough beginnings, and it's like, well, there's two ways out. Either you join the priesthood, or you go on a rob to sort of like to look after your family, and it's like, well, there it is. Do you know what I mean? It's like, even in the way, it's like, well, while his brother might seem more virtuous, it's, in a way, he did a more cowardly, more selfish act by going into priesthood. So it's not particularly sort of like cut and dry, as the movie would say. And then I think that is probably the good, the bad, the ugly. Is that it's not the same with the characters. It's the way life is.
What I find in some respects, and I obviously we've got to go on to sort of Charlie in a moment. I'll be interested to see. I'm going to sort of I'm not going to direct what he says, but I want to almost point something and see what he thinks of it. I almost wish they hadn't put their monikers over their introductions at the start, because it would have been endless debate. A, which one is which, or B, the second thought, are we saying they're both or three?
Yeah.
So I think it would have been a more interesting debate than just spoon feeding us which one is meant to be which.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Or indeed whether each one refers in turn each to one of them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it would have given it that kind of the air of flexibility. Like it could apply to anyone or all three of them, or that they're both the good, the bad, the ugly at various points of the film.
Yeah. Charlie.
Yeah, there was a trailer which had Wallach as the bad and Van Cleef as the ugly.
All right. Oh.
Which does make sense if you can look at it that way, definitely.
Yeah, because I think ugly is perhaps more of a suitable title for Van Cleef and Angel Eyes.
Definitely.
I mean, this should be obvious, but at no point did any of us ever think they mean physically ugly.
No.
But yeah, if you go back to like the original Italian title as well, I mean, like the kind of it gets lost in translation a little bit, doesn't it? So because it's like.
Yeah, I mean, Eli Wallach's always been an amazing actor, and I don't know if you he's also the villain in the Magnificent Seven.
Oh yeah, of course.
I got distracted then because my wife's just come back from the shop, and I honestly thought she bought a bar of chocolate called Cunts. So it isn't. It's nothing like that. It's the font. It's the shape of the font on it. It's called Tony's or something, but it actually looked like Cunts when she held it up in the
Tony's chocolate. Tony's chocolate is very nice.
I don't want to be recording while my wife sat here eating cunt. It's not right.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Anyway, carry on.
But by the way, Tony's chocolate is very nice. So,
all right, carry on.
And very expensive. So
it is, isn't it? Isn't it just very expensive?
Yeah, £3.50 if you're lucky.
Is it
yeah, it's a lot.
Is it Irish or Australian or something like that?
No. I don't know.
Yeah, something like that, isn't it?
I remember a lot of people have been talking over it over the years, and I've just literally started seeing it in shops over here.
Yeah, so it's only recently come over, hasn't it?
I've never seen it before.
Dutch, apparently.
Dutch, that was it.
Dutch, right.
Yes. I mean,
that's why it's so expensive, because you have to import it.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Karen, Charlie.
It's all right. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, you could say that about all of the characters. They can potentially apply to those three titles over the film, and but whatever. It's kind of it would be interesting, but you can still kind of apply it even with the titles there, really, and kind of talk about what you think Leone meant in those titles. But I mean, yeah, the film's great. I mean, just pick up on something else as well is the music with kind of the main kind of theme, the just that little bit used where Eastwood it was a flute, with Van Cleef it was an ocarina, and then with Wallach it was people's voices.
Uh-huh.
So
that tells me what an ocarina is, because I recognise the instrument that wasn't a flute, so that was that. Yeah, voices. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Never thought about it.
Ocarina I associate with Zelda, with the Zelda game.
Well, yeah, exactly. Ocarina of Time, yeah.
Well, that's where my mind went as well. Didn't know what one was. I've never had Nintendo, so I've played it.
If you heard of the Ocarina of Time, then you'll know.
I've heard of it, but I've never had Nintendo, so I haven't played any of the Zelda games.
Still get a Switch. There's still time.
Yeah, get a Switch. Literally, it's the most beautiful game you will ever play.
And
apart from football.
Yeah, so the musical identification was there, which is cool. There was also Morricone wrote a beautiful kind of theme that's very similar to what the Soldier Story song was, the melody of that, for kind of like the Civil War stuff, that was kind of almost like a lament, and kind of like what Eastwood was in about what a waste of all it was, and you kind of felt very much that was Leone's feeling on the things through the music that Morricone composed. Yeah, it's a great film. Again, I don't know if I prefer it to A Few Dollars More.
I think I've come to the conclusion, and it's not a conclusion as in set forever. It's a conclusion as in what I definitely think this minute. What I definitely think this minute is it's objectively better, but I'd rather watch For a Few Dollars More.
Yeah, it's certainly got bigger ideas and a bigger scope.
Bigger runtime.
I mean, yeah. I feel it. I mean, I said before at the beginning, I think it's a completely different beast. Like it's almost like it almost feels like a different, like I won't necessarily put these films together in the same kind of category. Almost.
But it's so obviously like, Leone. I mean, the one thing I've not mentioned, I'll keep going back to Once Upon a Time in the West, mainly because that's my first love of Western, if you like. That's the one I love deepest and most, and it's got my. It's a bit like when I say On Her Majesty's Secret Service is my favourite Bond film. Is it that much better than any other Bond film? Well, I think it's better, but that is at least debatable. But then I start going, well, the score is my favourite, and the look of it's my favourite, and I'm a bit like it with that. I think that the score to that film is so beautiful, and this is so beautiful. But certainly here, it challenges it for those sort of close-ups on faces are amazing in this. That is so obviously Leone, and like I was saying to Charlie, what's the filmmaker called, Charlie? I keep thinking Parolini, but that's Sabata. I've just done Run Man Run. What was the filmmaker? Salima, yeah. You notice it when you do a similar type of film, but it's not Leone.
Yeah.
Because that film's attractive, by the way. Run Man Run's an attractive film, but it doesn't have the face as a landscape. So when you suddenly see it with the guy chasing Eli Wallach at the start of the film, you're like, oh, it's Leone. You can't help but compare them.
Yeah. It'd be interesting when you watch The Great Silence and you see Corbucci's style as well, which is amazing. And again,
how would you... do you want to talk about that next week?
Yeah.
Or do you want to talk about it now? I don't mind.
We'll talk about it next week.
Okay.
Maybe after next week, then we can use that as a comparison. I mean, it's
that'd be interesting.
Interesting to watch the three films and see the way Leone kind of is constantly evolving his style. And yeah, when you watch Once Time in the West as well, like he's with a.
That's like he's all grown up, but it isn't just that. He's got the money as well by then.
Yeah, and I certainly think that is the best of his spaghetti westerns. Yeah, I mean, this film is amazing.
It's a bit like using that Bond example again. Imagine all Bond films. I mean, it wouldn't survive. All jokes about them being similar aside. Imagine every Bond film had literally the same plot. Right?
Yeah, it wouldn't go very far with it.
Right, if they literally had the same plot, On Her Majesty's Secret Service would be my favourite because it's
George.
Because of the beautiful locations, because of the way it's shot, because of the sound, that sort of thing sets it apart for me. The film stock at the end of the 70s was so beautiful compared to the grainy stuff they used in the 80s. All of those factors, and I think that's one of the things with Once Upon a Time in the West. I can't remember whether it's objectively better. I think it is, because I think the story's a little bit cleverer and a little bit more multi-dimensional. Yeah. But it is still a bunch of morally grey people all kind of working against each other. But the score almost... Well, I'll say this now. I don't know if I've ever said this on here. Chris and Becca all know because they were there. My wife walked down the aisle to me to Once Upon a Time in the West.
Okay.
Did you know that, Charlie?
You did indeed. I think you mentioned it on the day.
I did.
The main theme for the film... which if I can, I'll get Chris to put it in the show notes. All right, I'll send it as a link to him in a minute. I'll send the actual version from the film, but she walked down the aisle to me to a piano version of it.
Oh wow!
Very beautiful it was too.
So the music, well, it was. I felt guilty afterwards because I was certainly not in charge. But the trouble is, you suggest things, and then your wife goes, "That's a brilliant idea." And so
it's your special day.
She's agreed. She's agreed, but you've chosen it. So, for example, she walked down the aisle to Once Upon a Time in the West. We signed the register to Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini from Somewhere in Time.
Yeah.
And then we walked out to a piano version of All the Time in the World by Louis Armstrong. And they are so obviously my choices, it's untrue.
I've seen Somewhere in Time now, by the way, Dave. I don't know if
we did Star Wars.
I know, Charlie. Which one was it?
Well, we did the Throne Room. I edited it. So.
Did you?
Oh, it was a recording. Yeah, it was part of the deal on mine. I'll sound such a fucking wanker saying this because it sounds like I'm made of money and I'm not. It was that I came into something from an air hunter and different things, but we had a pianist. And we had a pianist. So But what did you, Chris? You had some music for your wedding. I can't remember now.
It was Elvis.
Oh, yeah.
Oh really? Oh wow.
Yeah. It was and it was that and like an Austria version of The Cure.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. The throne room.
Oh, sorry
But yeah,
to make it to your wedding, Chris. I feel bad.
but yeah, basically,
That's why you should back it up.
I basically had two John Barrys and a Morricone. Well, no, that's not true. It were Paganini. They're absolutely on the theme of Paganini. Is not John Barry. It's just as cheesy as Bollocks, but the score's amazing.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful. I had to score my head off the entire time. I was like, oh.
Because even the John Barry bits fit with that Paganini one. It's fantastic. But yeah.
Yeah, and Christopher Reeve is fantastic in that film.
No, but you can see why he made a good Superman, because no one does Ernest like him.
Yeah.
He could play anything, and you'd believe that he believes in it as much as anything. That, you know, he desperately wants to be there doing that role, and he cares. Whatever he does.
Yeah.
The thing is, just slightly on tangent. If you when you look at that, it's the Grand Hotel, Mackinac Island. It's Massachusetts or something.
Mackinac
right?
Island.
Is it?
What do you say?
I'm going on how it's spelled. Apologies, Americans, mispronouncing that. It's a bit
I
like.
I can't pronounce any Italian names.
Well, yeah, it's a bit like when Clinton first ran for president, and we all thought he was from Arkansas because that's how it was spelled.
Yeah, because we don't know.
We had to hear Arkansas said. But in the book, it's a different hotel. But if you look that book up, that hotel is also gorgeous. The difference is in the book, instead of going back to 1912, he goes back to 1896. And in the book, he has a brain tumor, so it could well be a delusion. The other thing is, do you remember we were talking about, when we talked about planes, trains and automobiles, we talked about the guy that fell asleep on the plane with his head against Steve Martin, and it turned out to be Bill Irwin, who was an aged actor who was also in Star Trek The Next Generation and other things. He plays the older Arthur in that film. So remember when he goes back in time, there's a boy in the lobby playing with a ball. But when he goes there in the present day, which in the film is 1980, there's an old man who shows him around. That's Bill Irwin, Chris. Did you like it? Or even with the sort of Mills and Boone ending?
No, I mean, well, funny enough, I kind of like that ending.
It's just the way it was shot. It looked a bit, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be obviously kind of like went crazy, but
at the end, you know, it's a bit weird. But him.
Well, I think you have to say that, have to show that in some way, don't you?
Christopher Plummer's great as well.
Yeah. As the barrier.
And the funny thing is, Charlie might know more about this than me, just because he knows more about scores than me. But if you go and buy the score to the film, it's only about 36 minutes long. And I don't know if that's because that's all the scoring that's on the film, or whether it's just what happens commercially with film scores.
Well, they released an expanded version recently.
Right.
I'm just having a look on here.
If you think, keep looking, Charlie, and I don't mean to interrupt, but for listeners who've always listened to us, when we did the music of Bond, which Charlie was on for obvious reasons, when we were on this second episode, and we talked about later John Barry, Charlie was pointing out that, and if I mischaracterize what you said, correct me, because it was 7 years ago, but he was talking about how John Barry got a lot more romantic later in his run on Bond. And if you listen to the Moonraker score, and people disregard Moonraker because they think it's cheesy in space and everything else, forget what you think of Moonraker. I don't think it's a high-ranking Bond film, but I think one thing is it sounds... Well, I think three things about Moonraker, basically at a headline level. If you take out the fact he goes to space and there's a double-taking pigeon, most of it plays as sensible as any other Bond film of that era. But it looks beautiful and it sounds beautiful. The cinematography in that film is gorgeous, but it's also got this beautiful romantic score. And that is that era of John Barry. Now, literally the following year, he did the score to Somewhere in Time. And either watch the film, Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour, or at very least, go on YouTube or Spotify or whatever and listen to the score. And the very first track and the very last track, which is a reprise of the first one, is effectively John Barry's main theme for the film. But something like track 6 or track 9, I forget whichever it is Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini, an old piece of classical music which is a major theme of the film. They fall in love over that piece of music, basically. And it all fits together incredibly well, and it's super romantic, and you can almost cry listening to it.
Yeah. So they released an expanded version. So the kind of the actual score is about 44 minutes, but there's also kind of like music.
It's not a super long film anyway.
No, but there's also kind of like music, like alternate pieces and performances of Rhapsody on the theme of Paganini and stuff like that, and things for. So the actual disc is like 76 minutes long.
Yeah, to give a clue to anyone who hasn't seen the film but has always followed our podcast, to give you an idea of like the thing that sets the plot in motion. If you think of Star Trek 4, in Star Trek 2, Bones had bought Shatner some glasses, and in Star Trek 4 he sells it in an antique shop, and he says, but Bones gave them to you, and he said, and he will again. Right, so it's like a perfect loop that somebody gives you something you gave them in the past, effectively, and that's like a major thing in somewhere in time. He falls in love in the past, basically. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I love
it. It's shot by the same guy who made Supergirl, Ellen Slater's Supergirl. Are we done on Finding?
Jaws 2, yeah.
And Jaws 2. Jaws 2's all right though.
Gino Swap, yeah.
Jaws 2's all right. I mean, it's got a thankless task because it's following Jaws, but it's at least to Jaws what Superman 2 is to Superman, I'd say.
Yeah.
But we'll cover that one day with Charlie on it as well. Are we done with final thoughts, folks?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I don't know about the facts though. I still feel kind of.
I feel uninformed. I feel well informed on romantic John Barry music and Mills and Boone. But I feel less informed on whatever film we've just covered, because it was ages ago we were talking about this. Which is it?
Mills and Boone ending.
I'm that ill-informed. I don't even know what film we're talking about.
No, nor do I. It's a while ago.
It's been about 7 years.
Oh yeah, it's that good, bad, and weird or whatever.
One of these days, I think we will have to do as a one-off somewhere in time. I kind of feel that it's coming. I would like to.
It's too late this year. But what about a Valentine's Day episode?
Yes, we can do it maybe next year. I think I follow Jane.
A Valentine's Day commentary.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. How about that next year? I follow Jane Seymour on social media.
And we could challenge our readers.
Didn't they go back to the location last year?
We could do it as a challenge. We could challenge our listeners to last as long in the bedroom as our commentary runs. Listen to us while you give your lady a special life. And if you last as long as Becca's fun facts, you know.
Oh God, there's a challenge.
I mean, quite frankly, if your relationship lasts as long,
to be honest,
I think you've done well.
Let's see if they can get through the trailer for the episode. That's only about 3 minutes. You can do that, surely.
With the help of a little blue pill.
Becca, teach us about the final element of the Dollars trilogy.
So yeah, I've got some fun facts here. One is potentially a bit controversial.
Run it past us and we'll see what we think.
If not, I have a standby fact.
Don't worry about it. Go with it.
Just go with it.
It's about the casting.
Go with it. The chances are we won't know either way, and if we do know, we'll correct it. So don't worry. Go on.
Thank you very much. It's a bit further on down the list, so I'll start with my fun fact number one. Oh my God, it's breaking my desk.
Skeletor.
The Skeletor, yes. Yes, He-Man, I'm here. So yeah, the skeleton scene at the start.
Bunglers!
You idiots! I don't know why I'm suddenly doing Skeletor impressions.
He-Man's a dick.
I am Adam, Prince of Eternia. Anyway, yes, so the skeleton scene in the grave at the end of the film is actually a real skeleton of a real person, apparently belonged to a Spanish actress, who in her world wanted to carry on acting off even after she died. And
her wish came true.
Do you think that's how they made Weekend at Bernie's?
So she made a posthumous appearance in this film, unfortunately. So her legacy lived on even after she had passed on.
As That's a really cool fact, actually. I really like that. I didn't know that.
See, sometimes IMDb does throw up some really fun facts.
All right, go on.
And I seem to have had a trend of having fun facts about people who have died, and that's really sad.
Oh God! Anytime anyone dies, we're straight onto each other. Did we talk about them?
Did we kill them?
We're not even superstitious. I don't know where this came from.
John Watson. Obviously, we didn't cut off because we haven't done any football type films. Who else died? Margaret Thatcher's spin doctor passed away.
You literally asked me.
We didn't kill him off.
About somebody
the Queen.
No, we didn't kill her. No.
No, we did talk about.
Well, in fairness, Queen died where we weren't really recording a lot.
Yeah, but she died listening to us with Samuel L. Jackson and so on. So yes. But there was somebody recently, I'm not going to bust the gut trying to remember who, but we were straight onto each other going, have we covered anything they did?
Yeah, it was some famous person, wasn't it? We were like, oh my God, did we? Because, unfortunately. Anyway, fun fact number 2. As with these spaghetti westerns, due to largely Italian crew and international Italian cast and crew, obviously, director Sergio Leone spoke next to no English, and Eli Wallach spoke no Italian. But they both spoke French, so that's how they managed to communicate on set, by speaking French. Fun fact number 3, at the top of this show and in a previous review, fun facts, we also mentioned Clint Eastwood's iconic poncho. In a 2020 interview, Eastwood reported that he still has it, and he has never actually washed it.
I don't imagine, unless he keeps putting it on, it probably doesn't smell by now.
No, I think it lives on.
But that's how me and Chris. That's how Chris doesn't speak Southern and I don't speak Northern, so we just talk bollocks.
Bravo, that's hilarious. He keeps it in a glass case, and apparently loaned it out to a friend who owns a Mexican restaurant nearby in his hometown of Carmel.
Which he was once mayor of.
He was mayor of Carmel by the sea. I can't, because there are 2 Carmels, aren't there? But yeah, he was once mayor of the town. This is my fun fact number 4, a little bit controversial, but I've also got a backup fact, so you're kind of getting 6 facts tonight.
All right.
This one was not without controversy. Obviously, the casting of Eli Wallach is a man of Polish Jewish descent, being cast as a Mexican outlaw, just due to his colouring. But unfortunately, this was common at the time. And plus, it's kind of what I was trying to tap into earlier about.
Well, yeah. Alec Guinness played an Arab, that happened.
Being seen as high art, so they could kind of get away with it. For example, another example.
Sorry, I've got one question about that. You've just said it, but I need you to repeat it. What is Eli Wallach's racial background or ethnic background? Sorry.
I don't know. But yeah, no. Is he like?
What did you just say? Polish or something?
Yeah, I think. But I may have been. It's basically casting a white man as a.
I just assumed he was Mediterranean, but that was.
I mean, it's no Mickey Rooney Breakfast at Tiffany's, though, is it? Really?
No, it's not. Because the first thing I ever saw him in was The Godfather Part 3. I assumed he was Mediterranean, and I suppose that's to the shame of us that we go close enough, if you know what I mean, which is a horrible way to look at it.
We're a bit more
darker skinned,
and sort of, that sort of thing. But today, I think obviously we're a bit more attuned to it. But I say it was something that was done commonly at the time. An example of this I can think of is probably the 1960s original West Side Story, casting like Greek American actor George Takeiris as a Puerto Rican character, and other characters.
Chris is right though. Mickey Rooney's the obvious example.
Yeah, that's a really racist.
Alec Guinness is an obvious example. John Wayne played Genghis Khan.
That's
but that's just hilarious though.
But I don't think that this is the thing. I don't mind these warnings, for example. I don't. I try not to be too far on one side of any debate. I don't mind if you've got a film coming on Disney Plus, Netflix, or wherever that you say this film reflects an era of different.
Yeah. So there is something in the news about.
I don't think there's anything wrong with doing. I have a problem with that.
Start, when they get republished again,
I do
stick a notice at the start saying that these films.
And I hate this word, but I'm going to say it to get my point across. Most quote unquote woke people would have a problem with that because they go, well, no, that's a complete bastardization of what we'd want.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't have a problem with putting warnings on stuff. Where I do have a problem is that, I've seen it in 1920s films and stuff like that you cast the closest you can find. Ricardo Montalban was not, Sikh. It was done. It was done without malice. I think.
Look at Joseph Wiseman playing Dr. No.
The biggest thing is don't do it. Yeah, Miss Taro was not trying.
Miss Taro, yeah, precisely.
But
Laurence Olivier is a fellow. That's a really bad example.
Don't do it now. That's all. Don't do it
Yeah.
now. And if you want to put something on the front that says, not sorry, you don't have to flagellate yourself over it, but you just put something on the front to say, this was our best understanding at the time.
Yeah, it's like the Roald Dahl novels kind of being
And then-
edited and that sort of thing. Just stick a thing at the front saying, look, these are the prevailing attitudes at the time. This is the prevailing language at the time. It was offensive back then, doesn't make it right, but here is the text as it was originally
Yeah,
provided.
it doesn't help Roald Dahl was reportedly not a very nice man, so it's
No, it doesn't help that he was
it's an
anti-Semite.
easy- It's an easy stick. Yeah, it's an easy sort of stick to beat him with now.
No, but just as a current argument. Anyway, my backup fact.
Anyway, go on.
I was trying to go for my facts and I thought.
No, come on, we're all grown ups. We
It was
can
something
talk about
that
stuff.
it doesn't make it right, but it was kind of done at the time. And it's something that didn't even occur to me. I was like,
If we were
okay.
100% honest, the four of us would not agree on absolutely everything.
No, this is it.
Just say stuff. We listen to each other. It's fine.
But it's like, it's like as we were saying, obviously because this was a spaghetti western, it wasn't considered like high art, for example, so you could kind of push that envelope. Anyway, Henry Fonda, Lee Marvin, and Enrico Maria Salerno were also considered for the role of Angel Eyes. And as with the previous Dollars movies, Salerno actually dubbed Eastwood for the Italian release. And my fifth or sixth fun fact, this is the third of 6 times Morricone would work with Leone. Others time obviously being the Dollars trilogy, Once Upon a Time in the West, Fistful of Dynamite, Once Upon a Time in America. I think Morricone's soundtrack album for this film stayed in the charts for over a year. I don't actually know what his most successful album is. Charlie, you might know this, but it remains one of his most successful scores.
Right, I guess there's two. I'm going to split that question down, and if you can't answer it, Charlie, it's fine. If you can,
I'm putting you on the spot tonight, Charlie.
no,
Sorry.
no, I want to break it down. Actually, I would ask it as 2 questions. The first sub question would be, what's his most successful soundtrack? My second question would actually be, what's his most iconic score? And I would suspect that's 2 different answers. And I would suspect,
yeah, probably. This is probably the most iconic, I would say.
Probably. What would you say, Charlie?
Well, apparently, Once Upon a Time in the West is
okay.
But there's also The Mission as well.
Sorry, which one is what? Would you say?
The Mission.
The biggest selling one.
Yeah, it's too quick. Most iconic, best
yeah.
selling. 2 different. Which would you say was which? Because the thing is, how do you break it down? Because if you said piece of music, it would be the title song to this. But if you were to say entire soundtrack, well, there's 3 or 4 things on Once Upon a Time in the West most people know.
Yeah, exactly. That's got the main theme and the harmonica theme and stuff. So I think Once Upon a Time in the West is probably the biggest set. And yeah, I'd say this theme is most iconic.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because we're from sort of the English-speaking world, so we've got. If you transpose it onto Jerry Goldsmith, or even more obviously a John Williams, just because he worked with so many high-grossing films. Yeah. If I said to you now, which is John Williams' most iconic piece of music, well, you could give me a point of view, but it wouldn't be definitive. It couldn't be. There's too many.
Yeah. I mean,
the obvious thing is Jaws, because it's recognisable from like 2 notes.
Yeah.
But the fact is, you couldn't say that. You go, well, hang on a minute. The main theme to Star Wars, the main theme from Indy, the main theme from this, the main thing, and so on.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, it's like Jaws is.
Well, if it was named that tune, you would name it quickest, because 2 notes, you got it.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm trying to say is Jaws is musical shorthand for a shark and for danger, even to people who have never seen Jaws.
They still know what it means. It's like the shower theme, Psycho. You still know what that.
If you were
if
you were in water,
I know that's not what John
if you were in
Williams,
the sea and it came over the public address system, you'd be a little bit uncomfortable.
You'd be like, get out the water.
But it's almost generational. And I suppose because my daughter knew it before.
Well, some would say without talking about transphobes and stuff, but a lot for a modern generation, the main theme from Harry Potter is iconic. It is. It's very
definitely.
Yeah,
Jurassic Park to your generation, Becca.
Yes, it is precisely.
In the same way, though, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is kind of shorthand for a western. For a shooter, And if you think of a Western, if you think of Western music, it is likely to be the first thing that pops into your head. And when you
I'd say so. Music-wise, I can't think of anything else.
No, and when you think about how many times it's been parodied and stuff, I mean, I can remember there's the episode of The Simpsons where Homer eats the chilies.
Oh,
yeah.
Fantastic, that episode.
That's brilliant, isn't it? That's classic.
And it's kind of like a Western setup where he's walking down the street, or the faux street in the chili festival,
Yes.
With his spoon by his side, and it plays that theme.
Yeah, it's literally that's my first place my brain
But if
went
you
to. I was
said-
like, hold on a minute.
Well, the point is, right, if you said to the average person, I'm not talking about film experts, music experts, I'm just talking about somebody fairly cine-literate, they've seen a good number of Westerns. If you said to them, pick a piece of music for a Western sequence, they would say that.
Yeah, this one.
But if you said you can't pick that, pick something else, you'd get 15 different answers and a lot of people going, I don't know.
Yeah.
Magnificent Seven.
Season 7 would probably be.
Maybe.
Yeah, you get like the Magnificent Seven or something like that.
Maybe. But there aren't many like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely iconic. As I say, I'm not quite sure what the most successful one is, but yeah, this has to be up there in terms of like the most iconic Morricone scores.
We've had a great time with this. I want to do two things. Obviously, I want to do the whole social media thing.
Oh.
And then I would like to ask Charlie, without giving the title away, I know we did earlier, I'd like him to tell us a little bit about what we're going to cover next time, just in terms of who the filmmaker is and what we can look forward to, and then obviously we can sign off. As for me, you can find me at the Pasty Kid 1976 on Twitter.
You can find me on Cinematronics on Twitter. You can also find all the episodes on Podbean. Just look for Do You Expect Us to Talk, and should be all over. Well, most podcasting services.
All I would add to that is if you spot episodes missing that you want to listen to, if you don't want to listen to them, it doesn't matter. But I know some people occasionally go back to like listen to an old Bond episode because that's how we started or whatever. If you spot an episode missing, let us know, because we don't know if you don't tell us.
Is expected tonight. Would you also like to check
Alexa misunderstood that comment entirely.
Alexa, please be quiet.
And I will leave it in. Alexa, piss off.
Alexa, tell us a joke.
Me and my wife were in bed last night, and we were
That's
talking.
Disgusting. I don't need X-rated stories like that.
We were talking about what modern pop music and how we don't really get it, and what is popular. And I said, I guess something like Drake. And apparently Drake has a song called I Guess or something like that, because Alexa suddenly went, playing I Guess by Drake.
Okay, Alexa always listening.
It normally asks really, really straight. Normally, like, out of nowhere, you'll be sat having a chat. I was here one day, and I was just chatting to, like, Joanna about something, and suddenly the Alexa started making farting noises, right?
Really?
And asked me if I wanted different ones. That's just the way it is. But anyway, so that's me for social media. Let's sign off, folks.
I don't have a smart speaker, so I don't have any of these hilarious stories, unfortunately. But yes, whatever your podcatcher of choice, please don't forget to rate us, review us, like us, and
if
share
you're
us.
missing an episode, tell us though, please.
Yeah, do let us know. You can drop us an email. Or you can find us across social media: Facebook at Do You Expect Us to Talk, on Twitter at Do You Expect Us to Talk, on YouTube search Do You Expect Us to Talk. And as Chris said, you can find us all our episodes on Podbean. We're also on Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts and Podbay, wherever you. But yes, as I was going to say, wherever you do find us on your podcatcher of choice, please kindly give us a 5-star rating. It helps us to rank higher and attract more listeners. And whilst you're there, why not, whatever platform you're on, why not copy a link to the podcast that you're listening to? Do it as a status update. Give us a quick tweet. Pop it on your Facebook status. Let us know what you're listening to. Why not listen to Do You Expect Us to Talk?
We haven't been around for a while, so do talk to us. We'll happily chat to you about anything.
Yeah, definitely drop us a line. But share us wherever you're on. It helps us to attract more listeners. I'll try to find out a more attractive way of saying this. I'll probably rip it off from the Jerry Anderson podcast, I'm sure. But yes, please do get in touch. I'm out of practice, sorry.
You can find me at Films on Wax on Twitter. Okay, so next week.
Chris, sorry, Charlie. Can I just ask something else? Because you
Yeah.
put out a newsletter this week. Do you want to tell people about it? Because I read it and thought it was good. Do you want to tell people
Yeah, I really
about
enjoyed
it?
reading it. Tell us all about it.
I've been doing a newsletter on film music, and it is called Movie Drone. And if you want to go to the address, which I can't remember where it is, give me 2 seconds. Okay, so if you go to moviedrone.substack.com, you can read it, sign up, and hopefully you'll find it enjoyable.
What did you talk about this week? Because I happened, a lot of the things with social media, particularly Twitter, you got to be looking at the right time. I happened to glance at Twitter at the right time that Charlie had just shared it. So I happened to read it. I can't remember when I last did, if I'm honest, but I read this week's and I enjoyed it. I can't remember what you put on there, though, Charlie. What sort of topics did you talk about this week?
Oh, I linked to a very important Guardian article.
This was about the treatment of female members of orchestras?
Well, more kind of female composers and assistants.
Yeah.
And things like that, and how there's various things, horrible things that men had done, and also just
power dynamics.
Yeah, power dynamics in the industry in general, and how people are abused. So I linked to that. A composer called Gerald Fried, who's probably most famous for writing the battle music in the Star Trek episode of Mock Time, where Kirk and Spock fight each other.
Episode 1, season 2.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to find it
exactly.
quickly.
Yeah, he wrote that.
That pops up in a Jim Carrey film.
It's basically Spock's horny.
Pops up everywhere. Yeah.
For an hour.
He wrote the music for that, so he sadly died.
Oh.
To be fair, Star Trek was nearly 60 years ago, so there's a good chance he was of decent age.
Oh yeah, he was like 89.
Okay, so next week's films, Charlie.
Yeah, so next week is a fantastic film, in my opinion, from a director called Sergio Corbucci.
None of us have seen it.
So Sergio Corbucci, and he did a few westerns. He did the original Django, which came out in 1966, at the same year as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yeah, so he's known for films that are very, very violent and just don't kind of flinch from portraying how brutal the West was to a lot of people. So next week, Becca.
Before we name it, we'll talk about it more next week. But just to sort of tease it, why have you chosen it? We were doing a short series of Leone, and we talked about it, and we all agreed to put this film in. What about it do you think is good? What is it? Why are we putting it in?
It's just really, I mean, it's a masterpiece. It's kind of in a very kind of different style to Leone's films, and it's set in the snow, which is just kind of immediately a different environment.
Rare, really rare.
Yeah. For a western, it certainly stands out because of that, and it's a really, really brutal film that
I'm cool with
really
brutal.
Lays down even more than Leone's films the level of brutality and sadism that the West had, and it's just really difficult, and there's a really kind of desolate feel to it.
Okay, so that's the tease. Becca.
I thought that's right. No, yes. Do expect to talk return with our review of The Great Silence.